the record, your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of the testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Very good, and thank you. And I want to start off by apologizing for my tardiness. As you know, we're down a commissioner ordinarily with the passing of Commissioner Fish, and Commissioner Fritz could not be here today. And so I apologize. We did not have the quorum to be able to convene on time. So thank you all for your patience very much. Same to my colleagues. Thank you for your patience. First up is communications, Carla.
Item 158, request of Mark Reynolds to address council regarding homeless camping, drug sales, and use, prostitution.
And are there several people who want to come up together? It looks like there's 4 people. Do you want to come up together or separately?
That's just me.
It's just you? Okay, very good. Come on up. Good
Good
morning.
morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Mayor Wheeler.
Morning.
My name is Mark Reynolds. I live on Southeast 81st and Malden Street, which is 1 block south of Flayville, directly across from the Department of Human Services and 4 blocks from the Springwater Corridor. My statement to you is longer than 3 minutes, the allotment, so this is a shorter version. I hope you will please read the full draft. My street is overrun with campers, drug sales, drug use, and property crime, in addition to all manner of livability, health issues, and biohazards. Our group of property and business owners, as well as city, state, and law enforcement agencies, have been working together to find solutions for this location, such as outreach, DHS services, and community resource fair that included over 25 local participants offering services. Our proximity to the Springwater Corridor, the DHS office, and restrictions on law enforcement have added to this problem. I have witnessed all this happening on my street in front of my home and grandchildren, and it's truly awful. I have witnessed sales of drugs to middle school age children and the trafficking of young girls. I had a camper attempt to stab me with a screwdriver he was using to break into my car with, as well as daily drug transactions, other crimes associated with this event, stolen vehicles, property theft, vandalisms, solicitation, car prowling, graffiti, and threats of bodily harm. The impact on my life is I no longer feel safe on my own street. I am not comfortable with my grandchildren visiting me in my own home, and when they do, they're not allowed outside. The rule at Grandpa's house is don't open the door. I'm losing sleep because of the stress, and livability is very poor. We seek assistance with permanent signage, 1 additional street light, and the guidance of law enforcement to restrict camping, as well as drug sales and use on our street. Safety is our first priority, and hope you see fit to help us by assigning one of your staff to work together with us on these issues. I would also like to thank you for the Portland Street Response Pilot Program and the progress on the Bybee Lakes Hope Center, formerly known as Wapato. Thank you for allowing me to speak here today. Please won't you take a look at the photos I have enclosed with my full submission, and I look forward to having an advocate in the City Council.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And if you hand Carla that packet, if you can part with it, she'll photocopy it and give copies to
I
all.
think
We
you
already
have a copy
it?
already, sir.
Oh, terrific. We've got it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your
Appreciate your
time.
being here, and thank you for sharing your
Mayor,
story.
do you mind if I
Commissioner
ask the
Hardesty.
question?
You bet.
You made a statement about untying law enforcement's hands. law enforcement hands are not tied. When they see a crime or somebody called to report a crime, they have an obligation to investigate that crime. Being houseless, however, is not a crime. It is a situation. And so I just wanted to correct that misperception that somehow we're not allowing police officers to police the city of Portland. So I really appreciate, and I understand your concerns. I live in a neighborhood that we have a lot of campers as well. And many neighborhoods are being very proactive by taking meals, taking warm gloves and socks. So they're a way for all of us to help. We're in a crisis, and we're in a crisis because this town is too expensive to live in. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge something you said, and I'm going to read this with interest. You mentioned a human services fair as well to connect people to resources. That seems like a really great idea, and I appreciate your being engaged on that front as well. And I'm hearing your concerns about safety for you and your family.
This is a fairly well-rounded group of people that are addressing this issue, and I agree that the police have all the rights to address crime, like you said. But these people, I believe that they need our help, but they need to want our help first. And the issues we're having with the people on my street is they're not looking for help. Help is 100 feet away in the DHS office. They've been there for over a year, some of them, and I think you all know what goes on in these places if you've witnessed it.
Okay, thank you. We'll look into it. Thank
Thank
you.
you, too.
I appreciate it. Next individual, please, Carla.
Item 159, a request of Kate Wilkinson to address council regarding homelessness and its effect on the neighborhood.
Is Kate here? Next, please.
Item 160, request of Daniel Hoffman to address council regarding Housing First and propose a viable alternative solution to the homeless crisis called elevator economics theory.
Too bad. I was too. I wanted to hear what that was all about. Next individual, please, Carla.
Spending too much time with you.
161.
That is weird, yes.
161, request of Diana Gutman to address council regarding making Oregon a safer place for survivors of violence and abuse.
I know Diana's here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is this Diana's testimony? Great, thank you. Good morning, Diana.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I just want to take a moment to honor the host people of these lands and acknowledge them. The Clatskanie, the Kalalapuya, the Chinook, and the Clackamas. Over the last year, I have been working hard here in the city of Portland, working with community partners and Oregon state legislators to help establish ways for residents and constituents of Oregon to keep them safe. I have put a lot of thought into the steps that we can take here in the state of Oregon. As of right now, there is a population of constituents and residents that are unable to file for protection orders because they do not meet the criteria. These criteria center around domestic partnership and committed partnership. This population includes the homeless who are living on the streets being subjected to abuse, people who work in the adult entertainment industry that do not meet the domestic or committed partnership criteria, the LGBTQ community, and children who aren't able to legally give consent. If we can implement consensual partnership, we will be able to serve more residents and constituents here in the state of Oregon. The legislative updates that I have is centered around the proposal of House Bill 3117 and how it was able to get passed last session and was signed into effect by our Oregon State Governor on May 22nd. This bill was declared an emergency because for the survivor, it will always be an emergency. What House Bill 3117 does is allows survivors of violence and abuse who are trying to maintain their protection orders here in the state of Oregon to no longer have to prove fear for their life, but reasonable fear. Because of this legislative change, now survivors have more opportunities to maintain their protection orders here in the state of Oregon and feel safe in the communities that they reside in. The proposals that I have for the 2021 session is centered around supporting survivors of violence and abuse. The first proposal that I have is a peace of mind bill. This legislation is for survivors who have had their protection orders contested. And currently, when a petitioner files for and is granted a protection order, the respondent has the right to contest the order within 30 days. However, this process can take months and many hearings, during which the petitioner is forced to see the respondent repeatedly, despite having the intent to keep the respondent away from the petitioner. Regardless of how long the deliberation takes, as it stands now, the petitioner will have to file to renew their order within 1 year of the initial filing date.
Without objection, I'd like to hear the rest of this.
Thank you. Even if after 10 months of deliberation, the court rules in favor of the petitioner, or if the respondent decides to drop the contestant 9 months into the proceedings, the petitioner would only have 3 to 2 months in which they do not have to face their attacker. This bill would require that a new expiration date be set, suggested 1 year, in the event of a drawn-out court-contested order. If no contested is filed, the expiration is 1 year from the original filing date. No changes are prescribed in this case. If the order is contested and takes more than 30 days to resolve, the initial expiration date is unacceptable and must be extended to allow the petitioner to have their year of peace of mind, knowing that they must have their attacker stay away from them.
Diana, can I ask you just a couple of questions? Number one, thank you, and it looks like you're here representing a coalition, is that is it true?
No, these are
Well, you already
my
have
family
fans.
and friends.
You already have fans here, then we'll put it that way. Number two, have you had a chance to talk to our legislative director, Elizabeth Edwards?
No, I have not talked to Elizabeth Edwards. I have been in communication with our state legislators in Salem, which consists of representatives and senators. These legislations for the 2021 session have been proposed already to the legislators in Salem, and so there is extensive dialogue. I have an ongoing list of supporting people in the Salem Capitol that are ready to either introduce or sign on as a supporter for these legislative changes.
I'm interested in this, so please keep me appraised of what's going on. And after this session is done, because I know Elizabeth is swamped and
Yeah.
ensconced down there in Salem.
It's a short session.
Well, that's true, unfortunately. All our bills are just sitting there. I'd like to make that introduction. Yeah, good.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. We'll let you finish, but I just wanted to say that you are a remarkable example of someone who takes a bad situation and then becomes an advocate for other folks who have had the same experience. You don't know how many people you help just by showing up at City Hall on a regular basis and having your voice heard. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Am I allowed to flip the page over and
Sure, go
proceed?
ahead.
Okay. The additional proposed legislations, number 3, Know Your Rights cards. These cards are Know Your Rights cards and should be given to petitioners when protective orders such as FAPAs, SAPOs, EDPAs, and additional protection orders are obtained, and explain to the petitioner that they cannot violate their own protection order. This is a crucial. This would be a crucial tool for all survivors, because when you get a packet for your protection order, it's very daunting, and it's not entirely clear as far as what to do in the event when you have to enforce your protection order. So these Know Your Rights cards would educate the community, educate the survivor in a way that is not putting too much material, but condensing it down to the fact that they will not be able to violate their own protection orders, that if the respondent refuses to leave, immediately, without a doubt, call the cops, and there would be a non-emergency number listed on the Know Your Rights card with additional information. The fourth legislative change that I have proposed is consensual partnership. As of right now, there is a population of constituents and residents that are unable to file for protection orders here in the state of Oregon because they do not meet this criteria. My hope is that by implementing this, we would be able to have a more inclusive protection order for survivors here in the state of Oregon so that they can thrive in their own communities and feel safe and protected as one should. And then lastly, CVPO, which would be Consensual Violation Protection Order. This is a new form of protection being proposed. This would establish a new form of protection for people and constituents who do not meet the domestic and committed partnership criteria and are unable to file for these protection orders or denied in the process of filing for these protection orders.
So Diana, give us an example. Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
Diana, please give us an example of what you mean that this would protect folks who today would be unable to get a protection order.
Absolutely. So this would be, for example, people in the adult entertainment industry. People who are in the adult entertainment industry, when crimes are committed against them, you have to be able to qualify under domestic, whether that means residing in the same household as your abuser, or if you have children or minors are involved, family matters. That is a domestic reason to file for a protection order. That falls under domestic partnership. That's a criteria that all survivors have to meet if they're going to file under that guideline. For committed partnerships, this would be in people who are in current intimate relationships or past intimate relationships and are no longer in those relationships.
Okay.
That's what committed partnership is for. Aside from that, there's the EDPA, which is for the elder abuse and for people with disabilities. You have to meet those requirements as well in order to file for that kind of protection order. And then lastly, a stalking order is like the unicorn for all protection orders and is incredibly difficult to obtain. However, it would be the most inclusive protection order if those requirements could be loosened. My proposal is implementing consensual partnership because when abuse takes place, that is a consent violation. It's the responsibility of all Oregon State judges to make a deliberation in an unbiased manner based off of the evidence and data that has been presented to them. By creating the consensual partnership, this would be something that would be intuitive, that would allow every party involved to be aware that something happened that was not okay with the survivor.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
that.
Thank you so much. My hope is that we'll be able to establish another form of protection for people and constituents who don't meet the domestic and committed partnership criteria and are unable to file for these protection orders. This will ensure that all survivors of abuse and violence will be able to get the help and protection that they need. This will be the starting point, and I would like to see consensual partnership established alongside domestic and committed partnership. These changes will further serve our community and constituents here in the state of Oregon. If you agree with these changes and would like to show your support, email easepnw@gmail.com to find out how to get involved. Written testimony is welcomed and encouraged. By providing additional written testimony in support of these changes, legislators in Salem who are helping me introduce these proposals for the 2021 session will have the opportunity to hear from more people in our community. One voice can make a dent, but the voices of many will have a stronger impact at invoking positive change for our communities. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your extra hard work on this.
Thank you.
And I believe that, 162, please.
Request of Gloria Buchor Luzader to address council regarding Houseless Pod Village on North Richmond Avenue in St. John's.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you here today.
Yeah, it's my third time on this subject.
Thank you.
It's not penetrating. Good morning, Commissioners and Mayor.
Morning.
My name is Gloria Bashor Luzader. I am a born and raised North Portland person. I graduated from Roosevelt High School and Portland State University. I was a teacher, a cannery worker, one of the first women to work in the OLCC distribution department, and a juvenile probation officer. Today, I am here to speak to you about a concern I have and a group of residents that includes renters, landlords, business owners, and property owners about the possibility of the village pods for homeless people on North Richmond Street in St. John's. The group I joined is called Neighbors for a Healthy Community. We meet monthly as an open forum. Anyone can attend. We have invited the church members and the community. Through rumors, we heard about this possibility in April 2019. First thought was, oh gods, here the city goes again. Let's dump on St. John's. Subsequently, we found out it was a negotiation with St. John's Christian Church, which has deed to the vacant property. The property in question was donated to the church by Ethel and Don McGill to be used as a playground for neighborhood children. The property is located a half a block from James John Elementary and the St. John's Library. It is adjacent to the Montessori Preschool and the Wayfinding Academy. Children walk near this area daily. At first light, it seemed like a feel-good donation by the church, and there was some community support. Within a month, it was learned there was a major sum of money that the church would receive monthly for their kindness. So much for the kindness of the heart for our houseless people. There were several community meetings, both at the church and James John Elementary School. These meetings became unruly and contentious at best. Nothing was solved or negotiated. We as a community felt we weren't being heard. Today, I am here for the third time to ask the council to reconsider the siting of these village pods on North Richmond Avenue. Our group is not a NIMBY. We accept there is a crisis with houseless persons. We accept that St. John's is considered high priority for such a development because of the North Portland Health Clinic, the ready access to TriMet, a food bank, and a somewhat welcoming, if now skeptical community. We Neighbors for the Healthy Community are only asking, not on North Richmond Avenue. Thank you for your consideration this morning.
Thank you, and perfect timing. Commissioner Hardesty, you get
Thank
extra
you.
credit for that,
You're
by the
so
way.
impressed, right? We're impressed too, right at the buzzer, just before the buzzer.
I wasn't even looking at that thing this time. Last time I was looking at it and I thought,
And
don't
that
look
makes you
at it.
even more nervous, right?
No, I just keep reading.
Yeah, just keep
Anyway,
reading. All right.
Thank you
you.
for listening to me. And it's like I said, we know St. John's is very, very acceptable of this.
So,
but
ma'am-
not on North Richmond.
So, ma'am,
Yes, ma'am.
may I ask you a question,
You
please?
most certainly may.
Thank you. So this is a faith institution that is attempting to assist people who desperately need housing, right?
The church.
The church, right? A faith institution, right?
Faith, okay,
Right.
faith institution, okay.
And my question to you is, why do you believe the city has a role in that?
Well, because your homeless group headed up by Mark Jolin has been at the forefront to some of the so-called community meetings, supporting the idea of putting this village pod on the North Richmond Avenue.
So here's what I would say to you. I haven't been engaged in those conversations, but what I will say is that Mark Jolin will go anywhere where someone says, yes, I will help with the crises that we're in.
Okay.
And we can only go where people invite us to go to try to help with the crisis, right?
Okay.
you know, if we had our way, if I had my way, let me just speak for myself personally. If I had my way, we'd only be building permanently housing that people could permanently afford to live in, right?
I agree.
If I had the opportunity to, if I could wave a wand, right? So understand that this is not, though the city would be totally supportive of anybody who said we can help with this crisis, right? We are not leading this effort. This faith institution is leading this effort. And I say thank you, right? Thank you for helping us because, you know, government can't do it by itself. We need faith institutions. We need community members.
Right.
In every part of the city, there are people that are volunteering their time and their energy, bringing
Yes.
people hot meals, bringing gloves and socks. And it just warms my heart when I see that people understand, but for grace go I, right?
Yes.
So I would work with the church to try to figure out how we could mitigate.
We have tried. They just won't. It's their property. It's their property, and we can't, we have, you know, please. When we first heard about this, we were enthused because we thought this is wonderful that they're donating this property. But then when we found out that they're getting close to $5,000 a month, the friendship thing just kind of went away.
Commissioner Daly had a
I'm
comment.
not sure what your point is, but I want to let you know that we had people from the Wayfinding Academy and the preschool who support the pod. This pod is based on a very successful Argyle village in Kenton. And
Yes,
it
we
really
know.
pains me to hear you say that we are dumping on St. John's by locating people that need shelter in your community. They're living in the cut, and it's extremely dangerous. And
They're living on our sidewalks, just
right.
like they are in
so
Southeast.
I actually don't want to engage with you because this has gone too long. I am responding to what you have said, and we can follow up outside of this session if you want. But there's a lot of support in your community for this pod, and that's all I have to say. Mayor?
Thank you.
Can we move on?
Thank you. And from my office, Seraphy Allen is engaged in this conversation, and I want to thank you for coming in and sharing your perspective. I do appreciate it. Thank you. Carla, have any items been pulled off of the consent agenda today?
We don't have a consent today.
Oh, well, then the answer is no, apparently. And we will not be voting because there's nothing to vote on.
Consent to any of this.
Very good. I forgot we don't have 4 people present, so there goes that. We'll start then with item number 163. That is our first time certain item.
Accept the Providence Park Comprehensive Transportation Management Plan 2019 Season Report.
Colleagues, our next item is the Providence Park Comprehensive Transportation Management Plan 2019 Season Report presented by Peregrine Sports of the Portland Timbers and the Thorns. The Comprehensive Transportation Management Plan, or CTMP, is required as part of the Stadium Good Neighbor Agreement. The Stadium Good Neighbor Agreement dictates how the stadium owner, operator, and surrounding neighborhoods work together to ensure mutual success. It is required by Portland Planning and Zoning Code to operate the stadium. We have Carl Lyle here from the Office of Management and Finance to introduce the report before we have Ken Puckett of Peregrine Sports and Phil Olmsted of Nelson Nygaard presenting. The neighborhood representatives from the Stadium Oversight Committee have also been invited to speak. Thanks, Carl. Why don't you go ahead and start?
Great, thank you very
Thank
much. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Carl Lyle. I manage the city's Spectator Venues program with the Office of Management and Finance. As you know, Peregrine Sports LLC operates the city-owned stadium known as Providence Park under the terms of a series of long-term agreements with the city. Peregrine is the parent company to the Portland Timbers and the Portland Thorns soccer clubs. As the operators of the stadium, Peregrine is responsible for developing a comprehensive transportation management plan to consider how fans will travel to and from events at the stadium. This plan must be approved by City Council. Peregrine's transportation plan was originally developed and approved in 2011 when the Timbers joined Major League Soccer and the stadium was remodeled from a baseball configuration to a being soccer-specific facility. To reflect the 4,000-seat expansion completed just last year, the plan was further updated by the Timbers and approved by the City Council in spring of last year. To develop the updated plan, the Timbers worked over a 2-year period during construction of the expansion with the city, their consultants, and the Stadium Oversight Committee, which includes neighborhood representatives appointed by the Goose Hollow Foothills League and the Northwest District Association, and you'll hear from them later today. When the City Council approved the updated plan last year, Council requested specifically that Peregrine prepare and present to you a monitoring report following the initial inauguration season in 2019. This is the report that's before you today. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Ken Puckett is the Senior Vice President of Operations at Providence Park, and Phil Olmsted is with Nelson Nygaard Consulting. Ken and Phil will present the report. After their presentation, we've invited the 2 neighborhood representatives, as I said, on the Stadium Oversight Committee to speak. They are Jerry Powell with the Goose Hollow Foothills League and Ron Walters from the Northwest District Association. After the presentation, I'm available if you have questions, and I've also seen a few key folks from transportation who are also in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
As many times as I do this, I'm still always very nervous, so work with me here.
Scary.
So as Carl said, we're here to present our CTMP progress report, and we're proud about a few things, and then we also can identify that we have a lot of work to do as we move this forward. Some of the highlights from last year, we had 25,000 fans generate approximately 4,900 parked cars. 53% of fans used alternative transportation to get to the games. That's the share of fans driving dropped to 47%. Get the slide up there. Nearly 9 out of 10 drivers, 9 out of 10 driving fans carpooled with one another. 60% of Timbers and 50% of Thorns fans patronized local or downtown businesses coming to and from the game. Peregrine Sports employs about a dozen full-time staff to work with closing streets, putting the bike racks out, and everything needed to support the CTMP, along with a lot of contracted services. Additional improvements are needed to address our fans parking on street. Timbers, we're already working on key actions for the 2020 season. Funding, I think you'll hear from Mike Krebs today with PDOT. We're funding increased parking enforcement. We're collaborating with the neighborhoods to identify more off-street parking. There's a lot of new buildings going up around us where we're pre-buying some of that parking already, and we'll continue to monitor the progress in the 2020 season.
So I'll take over.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. My name's Phil Olmsted with Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates. We're the traffic and transportation consultants supporting the Timbers and the Oversight Committee on this effort. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners, for having us again to review our findings and our work. I'm going to give a brief overview, but there's certainly a very detailed report in front of you with lots of data and lots of information. Our focus today is really to recap the monitoring we did in 2019, but I did want to quickly recap what you all approved back in April, I believe. So the CTMP included 21 measures to really address reduced driving, reduce congestion, and reduce parking in the community around Providence Park, as well as providing more multimodal options for fans. It's a complicated environment. Anytime you get 25,000 people coming to one location, it's hard to get them in and out of that area. So the CTMP really recognized that there's not one solution. It's a suite of strategies across modes, across programs, across incentives, across marketing communications. And the CTMP really recognizes that this is an ongoing effort requiring close monitoring, and that's what we've been doing over the last year or last season. So just a quick recap of what we did and what we took action on after your approval of the CTMP. We added, there are now 3 MAX trains in each direction that supports the regular service. Line 24 was expanded to the stadium and now provides additional service during or after the games, to and from after the games. We made a proactive effort to really formalize the pickup and drop-off around Lyft and Uber. We established some drop-off zones. There was a marketing campaign that the Timbers initiated and really shared with the fans. Also more investment in proven strategies that we know the fans really like and enjoy: more valet parking for bikes, dedicated scooter parking. Ken and his team really updated the website, providing not only more information on parking, but multimodal transportation options. And then, of course, we really made a concerted effort to improve the monitoring and tracking of data. The monitoring program was really designed to address past inconsistencies, lack of consistent data that we had. So we developed a new survey instrument, a new data collection plan, working with our partners. The Oversight Committee review, we met with them 4 times to review the monitoring program. They reviewed and provided input on the travel survey. And the survey to fans went out to a sample of both season ticket holders and single game holders. We got close to 4,000 responses. And we now have a consistent survey that we can use to better track progress from year to year. So some key highlights, as Ken mentioned, I'll kind of dig in a little bit more detail. What we saw as pretty good progress in 2019 seasons. The mode share for fans driving to the stadium went down to 47%. Less than half of fans drive to the stadium. And when they do, we definitively now know that the vast majority of them are carpooling, almost 9 in 10 fans who do drive, almost 3 fans per car.
0.7 per car.
2.7.
Sorry. I was.
So it's the average.
I'm 1.7.
And I would
That's the
note,
guy they pick up across the street.
I would note that we did beat our 3-year target already, and we got some feedback from you when we brought the goals to you to be a bit more ambitious, and we did end up beating that goal.
I'm pleasantly surprised, but I'm going to push you to set higher goals
Okay,
since you
yeah.
did so well this time.
Our transit mode share did go up. I think this is a testament to TriMet's investment in additional MAX and bus service. About 8,200 fans are now on transit, taking transit to the game. Active modes, so to speak, went up: biking, walking, scooting. And I would note that everyone who takes MAX is ultimately walking to the stadium. This is a reflection of people who walk for the entirety or the vast majority of their trips. That was the kind of core question in the survey. So about 3,300 fans are taking an active mode. We also asked not just about travel behavior, but satisfaction. About 4 in 10 are saying they have a real positive experience. They like the amenities, they like the services that the Timbers and the city are offering. As Ken mentioned, we have a better understanding not just of how people are getting to the game, but what they're doing and some of their behaviors. So I think we intuitively kind of knew this, but we definitively know that a good chunk of fans are not just going to the game, but going to local or downtown businesses as part of their trip to the game. One of the things we'd like to know a little bit more is where and kind of what their average spend is, and that's something I think we'll try and address in the 2020 survey. As Ken mentioned, there are areas to improve. So even with the mode share going down, the number of vehicles parking overall and the number of vehicles parking on the street did go up. This is partially a reflection of the fact that we added 4,000 more seats. But nevertheless, it's an area of focus, an area of improvement that we really identified for 2020. Part of that and part of the focus is making sure that fans utilize existing off-street parking.
So I have a
Yeah.
question. I just want to make sure I understand this
Sure.
dynamic, because I read the articles and it sort of posed the question. So the mode share is improving. It's moving towards
Correct.
transit, which we want. But the number of fans, the fan base has expanded, therefore there's still more vehicles
Correct.
coming in.
Correct.
Is that the right way
Yes, you've
to
summed it.
interpret this?
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, I won't interrupt you.
Yeah.
Continue.
So if we want to get those vehicles out, we got to continue to drive that mode share down. And that is ultimately, I think, the long-term goal, and we'll talk about those targets in a second. A big part of that also, if fans do drive, let's get them off the streets and get them parking in an off-street parking garage. So we looked at data from just a sample of off-street facilities, smart park garages, some of the more proximate private garages at Good Sam, at PSU, Parking Structure 1, and just looking at those looking at the data at the typical game time, there's at least 2,300 open spaces. So a big focus is how do we get more fans to those facilities, using those facilities, right? There is available underutilized parking at game times.
Okay, so I had a question about
Yeah.
this too. There's a supply-demand imbalance here. The price is too high.
Yeah.
Has anybody thought about lowering the price and seeing if you could get more people to park and therefore make more money and increase off-street parking?
That was my question as well.
I stole this question from Commissioner
Yes.
Daly.
Yeah, so price is a key driver of travel behavior and parking behavior. So I think it's a combination of making sure that you have, that your price incentives are driving people towards off-street parking. So if we want that off-street parking to be lower priced than on-street parking. That's really, really
We
important.
don't control any of that, right? I mean, this is a
We
bunch of
don't.
different.
We don't. So part of it-
garages, parking lots.
Right.
People's backyard, whatever.
So, yeah, the city as well, Smart Park, the city does have some control of that, and they've made some great efforts to provide that low-cost option, and they have a voucher program for season ticket holders that offers a 10% discount if you have a season ticket holder. I think one of the things we'd like to see more is maybe expanding that discount, marketing it better. A relatively small fraction of season ticket holders are using that. And then as,
Hey, for a
yeah,
sec,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, but almost nobody uses it. That gets the incentive. So is it the right incentive?
Well, I think it's something to explore, right? How can we see if we can maybe increase that reduction or increase that discount, better market it? But there
Commissioner
is
Daly.
capacity, yeah.
So I do want, I mean, since we've started to dig in.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, yeah, no, it's
I want to
totally bad
discuss
habit on
this.
my
So
part, sorry.
of the
my ADD kicking
underutilized
in, yeah.
parking, is any of that Smart Park or is it all privately owned?
So what we did in our data collection effort was we looked at a limited number of off-street facilities. There are several, upwards of 10,000 parking spaces in and around the stadium. We were only able to get data for a limited.
Off-street.
Off-street,
Yeah.
yes. So we looked at the 3 Smart Park garages you see here on this graphic, as well as we got data from Legacy Good Sam and from Parking Structure 1 at PSU. And just from looking at that small sample, we have identified a significant amount of available parking during game times. And remember, game times are typically weekdays in the evening and on weekends, right? We're not talking about, peak weekday time.
So those are all garages. We're not talking about, you didn't look at surface lots.
Correct.
Because the wheels are turning in my mind how we could work with privately owned parking garages or lots to increase use. But I lived in Northwest Portland for 18 years, and I've always been confused about when I can and can't park in that Good Sam garage. So I think there's some public education to do as well.
Right, I mean, we'd be proponent of the Good Sam Garage. We would help market that and drive folks there. One thing we did find, not to get off topic a little bit, but is that there has to be something around the parking garage that fans would park that distance from. So they go to Northwest, they go up 21st, 23rd, have dinner, have beer. The PSU garage, on the other hand, we made available, advertised. We didn't get very many people because walking from there to the stadium, there's not much to do.
There
So-
isn't much to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So and that drives the decision-making as well
Okay.
at that point.
So I would be happy to wait until you're done if you don't have a lot.
Sure, I have a couple other points to make, a couple other slides here. Ride hail is another focus for 2020. We did really make an effort to rationalize that mode. It's has its pros and cons. It reduces parking in the neighborhood, but can drive up congestion. So really tried to focus with a couple designated zones. And we did see some progress. Some fans are really utilizing these zones for pickup. I don't think we'll ever get to 100%. Just from the survey, we know that fans kind of disperse out from the stadium. If they are taking ride hail, they're going downtown. They're picking up their ride hail home at later hours and combining that with a trip. But it's something definitely to focus on for this coming year. So some recommendations, I think we already started touching on these, but really focusing in on making sure fans and directing them are utilizing off-street parking, whether it's the Smart Park Garage and the incentive programs around that, whether it's Legacy Good Sam, whether it's continuing to partner with private lot owners, and really directing fans to those underutilized facilities. Pairing that with management tools to continue to incentivize and manage that on-street parking in the best way possible. That could include looking at the rates during game times. It could include looking at the event district boundaries. Those, of course, have to go through the appropriate city processes and in partnership with the Northwest Parking SAC. Ken and his team have been working with PBOT to really come up with some enhanced enforcement efforts for the 2020 season, making sure that's cost effective and impactful, and folks are responding and the rules that are in place are enforced. Continuing to partner with our ride-hail partners, making sure that they are educating, informing both passengers and drivers about how to do ride-hail in and around the stadium. I think one of the things we'd be interested in, Ken and the team would be interested in, is piloting a pin-based program similar to what's at the airport, making it easier for fans to find and get their rides out of the stadium. I think that's something that we really like to look at in the 2020 season and beyond. And then finally, pushing our targets and continuing to use those as an anchor point for our work. So we've revised those targets. Would love your feedback on this as well. But getting down to 42% drive alone by the 2022 season, and really making sure that folks who are driving are parking off street and not on street. And I'll end my comments there and ready to take questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. And thank you so much for, I always love getting reports in advance because then I get to read them and mark them up and ask questions.
Sure.
So I want to start with, what I understand, the mission of the CTMP is to ensure that game day travel is safe, convenient, and simple, not just for fans, but all neighbors and stakeholders of Providence Park. I wanted to read that because I saw nothing in your report about the impact on the neighbors and the neighborhood. And I didn't see any surveying of the neighborhood about whether or not they are having more trouble this season versus last season, parking in front of their own houses or getting out of their own houses. So how do I evaluate the effectiveness without knowing what the neighbors actually consider in this process?
So you're correct. Our survey was focused on fans.
Why?
To see to really monitor how they are getting to and from the stadium. Identifying that mode split, that mode share for fans is one of the key ways in which we can address and evaluate impacts on the neighbors. We did identify and did articulate in the report that one of the key impacts and one of the key goals around reducing the amount of vehicles parking on street was not met. And I did identify that burden has increased on the neighbors. Again, our mode share went down for driving, but with the overall increase in number of fans, the number of vehicles parking on the neighborhood streets is a continued issue.
So how do we effectively evaluate whether or not you're having an impact if you're not weighing what's happening with the fans against what's happening with the neighbors?
Well, I think part of that is the process that's set up with the Oversight Committee. We have neighborhood representation on the Oversight Committee. They're helping us evaluate and provide input and represent the communities in which they live.
And we're going to hear from them.
And we're going to hear
Yes.
from, I will ask them those questions, but that was the deficit that I saw right away. This report only talks about how it's impacting the folks who play at the stadium, but it really doesn't talk about community impact in a way that I need to evaluate whether or not neighbors are just losing their minds on game day. I don't know, right? Because it's not in my report. So that's one thing that I found that I wondered about. I think one of the other questions that I had is really around, I would think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you could have the most impact on season ticket holders. And so season ticket holders are the ones that ride public transit the least. They're the ones that drive the most. They're the ones that don't even use the incentives. And, you know, I guess you could do your own analysis about why that would be. So what is your plan to actually engage season ticket holders and being good community partners?
Well, I'll let Ken jump in here
we
as well.
offer, when you buy a season ticket, you have a couple choices. You can get a half price pass on a transit. We fund the other half. You can pledge to bike, and you get a free valet bike with security, or you can pledge to walk. What we found is our fans want choices. They don't want to be all
Locked
fans.
in.
They don't want to be locked in on one mode. They want to, on a summer day, they want to walk down 21st and come to the game. On a rainy day, maybe they're driving more because of the rain. Weekday games, a lot less bikes come with their children on the back than on a Sunday afternoon. So it's just, our philosophy is just giving the fan the choices out there and the soup of Portland to decide what's the best way, and still by monitoring that for livability in the neighborhoods, I guess.
I would just hate for such a small sample to kind of guide as we move forward, right? You had a 22% return rate total, and so it's a good start. But, I don't know how much faith I would put into a 22% return rate as far as actually developing policy around that initial survey. Right. I do have a couple of other questions, but they're not as important, I think, as what the impact is on the neighborhood. So I'll wait. And if you'll be kind enough, I may have other questions after we hear from your oversight committee.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you. So, I can speak to the impact on the neighborhood a little bit because I lived there for 18 years on 19th and Hoyt, and the overflow from those games and events definitely impacted my neighborhood and beyond. So it is significant, and it's only gotten worse with the increased capacity at the stadium. I just have a few comments. One is, PBOT, of course, is working diligently to make the city safer to walk and bike in. We are pushing some transformative programs around transit, making transit a more kind of viable, desirable option for people that live further and further out. I want to push back on the idea that 2.7 people is a carpool. That's a couple and their kid. And I don't consider a carpool any less than 3. And carpooling is an area that I'm really interested in because it's a mode share it's the only mode share that's in decline in the city. And yet we have technology that should make it easier than ever to carpool. So I think there's an opportunity here to work with season ticket holders and the Timbers Army and the Thorns Fan Club to really encourage, carpooling is my third or fourth choice after bike, walk, transit. But if there were 3 to 5 people in that car, that would make a difference. Same with ride hail. There are carpooling options with ride hail, and although people taking TNCs to and from the stadium might alleviate some parking issues, it's not good for congestion and emissions. So those are the areas that I'd be really, and then increasing the use of surface lots. Those are the areas I'd be really interested in working with you on to increase.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Great.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from our Neighborhood Stadium Oversight Committee representatives, Ron Walters and Jerry Powell. Good presentation. Thank you for answering the questions.
Morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your patience as well.
Do you want to go first, Jerry, or do you want me to go first? All right.
And you can slide the mic a little bit, about
Sure.
6 inches is about the right distance.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for the opportunity to testify. My name is Ron Walters, and I am NWDA's representative to the Oversight Committee. I live on Northwest Overton, half a mile or so from Providence Park. I'm a Timbers fan, full disclosure, season ticket holder. I walked all the games. I also have a driveway, so the parking doesn't affect me directly. It's important to recognize that the 2019 season report was not prepared for or by the Stadium Oversight Committee. It was produced by a credible consulting firm. It has the challenging task of delivering a report that's both objective and acceptable to the Timbers, their client. We believe the report tends to highlight the positive news and downplay the hard fact that the primary goal of the CTMP was not achieved in 2019. As a reminder, and I'm quoting here from the CTMP, the primary goal of the 2019 CTMP update was to accommodate the transportation needs of 4,000 additional fans per match without increasing demand for on-street parking or increasing traffic congestion in the neighborhoods near the stadium. Allow me to highlight 3 critical facts that are embedded in this 35-page report. Fact number 1, demand for on-street parking increased significantly in 2019. It exceeded the 2019 goal by over 300 vehicles. Fact number 2, on-street parking by Timbers fans was particularly problematic in Northwest Portland. According to the report, 759 vehicles park on-street in Northwest Portland on a typical game day. Let me repeat that. 759 vehicles park on-street in Northwest Portland during a typical Timbers game day.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. And did you say on a non-Timbers day what the number was?
No.
No.
No,
Okay.
although the Northwest Parking SAC can provide that information to you. They've surveyed both game days and
But
non-game
you
days.
guess it's several hundred over.
Correct.
Over the baseline. Okay,
Correct.
thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, no problem.
I do want to just mention that number is not great for the local businesses as well as residents who are trying to park.
That's a good point.
Correct.
Customers are avoiding the whole area during game day because they can't park anywhere, so, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud, because
Or you can't get
I mean,
out of the
obviously, there is plenty of off-street capacity, there's plenty of options other than single occupant vehicles, so I'm excited about improving those numbers.
No, that's absolutely true. The business community is not monolithic. Plenty of them love game day. They're selling beer and you know, it helps thriving businesses. Others dislike it because their customers avoid the area on game days. Fact number 3, automobile traffic on game days increased significantly in 2019. Total automobile trips by Timbers fans, those who drove or took rideshare, increased by roughly 800 trips per match. So it's clear to us that more aggressive action is needed, and we appreciate the fact that the Timbers and the city recognize that. Believe it or not, we generally support the report's recommendations for additional mitigation. However, we're concerned that they may not be implemented. As it stands, the Timbers are not required to implement any of the recommendations in the report. And to date, the Timbers have resisted or ignored many of the recommendations previously proposed both by the NWDA and the Northwest Parking Stakeholder Advisory Committee. With that in mind, we ask City Council to support a more rigorous oversight process that includes 3 specific actions. 1, require the Stadium Oversight Committee to meet at least 4 times a year. The current GNA requires 1 meeting per year. 2nd, expand and diversify the committee to better represent the residents and businesses impacted by Timbers games. And 3rd, require the Timbers to actually act on recommendations that are approved by a majority vote of the Oversight Committee. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am?
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you so much for your testimony. My question is, can you describe to me what your Oversight Committee process is like?
I would love to have that conversation. In fact, the whole conversation about the Good Neighbor Agreement, how the committee is structured, the representation, the variety and diversity of representation is a point of contention for us.
I'm happy to
but-
have that conversation with you offline if you would like. But let me just say, you might remember that I was the only one that voted against this because I was pretty appalled at how the Community Oversight Committee had been treated, because you got the report the same time the City Council got it, and that is totally not acceptable when we have a Community Oversight Committee in place. So I'm very happy to work with the current members of the Oversight Committee to figure out how we can ensure that good neighbor agreements are maintained and kept, and then hold people accountable when they don't do it. So thank you so much. Appreciate that.
We'd appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor, ladies of the council, I'm Jerry Powell. I'm the Goose Hollow rep on the Stadium Oversight Committee.
Thanks, Jerry.
And have to point out that the interests of Goose Hollow and Northwest District Association are not always exactly the same, accepting that the impact on our communities is our overriding concern. And yes, Commissioner, we pay attention to what is happening at the stadium and how it's impacting us. With respect to some aspects of transportation, access is awful during games. And that's something that the CTMP can deal with. Parking is practically a non-starter in Goose Hollow. We're at 80% of our available on-street parking occupied in the afternoon anyway.
And non-game days.
On non-game days. So it pushes it up to 90% and then varies between 80 and 90 throughout the game. It's pretty hard to tell the difference. You see cars with different stickers on them. That's about the only way you can tell. The findings of the first season report are kind of unremarkable in that respect. Yes, there's more parking. While we lack the statistical evidence, basically we rely on anecdotal evidence within the Goose Hollow board, and we talk with our neighbors. We're the host neighborhood, and our experience was pretty consistent with the CTMP report, which is actually what we're here about. There's another conversation about the Good Neighbor Agreement that we'd like to have. But that's not here. The report finds that our early expectations for chaos were unfounded. We expected the worst. We also found that some of our aspirations weren't quite met. Some were spot on. But that's good and bad. There are places to improve, notably with respect to ride hail, pickup and drop off. As was noted by the consultant, the impact of the ride hail is on access. We've got to do something about access. There are only a few ways to get in and out of Goose Hollow, and they extend for some distance from Goose Hollow. Northwest has somewhat better access, but they've got the same problem. Once people get into the area and try to park, you need to get them back out. It's difficult. We have unused parking supply in city garages and at Good Sam. You've been told that. It's really, in my mind, as the representative, is as much a messaging problem as it is a transportation problem. Both of these issues are dependent on consistent and continued messaging, continued experimentation. To some extent, there's technology available that's not being used. Some of that's on the timbers, but not all of it. Some of it's on the suppliers of parking as well. I'd like to point out that transportation is just one of the impacts of the operation of the stadium on its host neighborhood. We're very aware of the other impacts and work constantly with all of those. There was a question about Timbers and Thorns fans. They're season ticket holders. They're seldom the problem that we find from the new fan, the new attendee, the out-of-towner. Those are the guys that drive around blocks in Goose Hollow and in close-in parts of Northwest trying to find an on-street parking space.
And how do you know that?
I see folks parking in front of I live 2 blocks from the stadium. Mm. I see the folks trying to find places to park.
All out-of-town license plate?
Some are out-of-town license plates. Some of them, go Gophers. Decals, sometimes actually see the same car repeatedly. That's more, it's interesting. That's only for Thorns games. And it's Thorn's games when mom with a SUV full of the neighborhood kids. And I don't blame her for trying to find a place that's close to the stadium.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to challenge that assumption that somehow it's
No,
not the
it's-
season
it's-
ticket holders. They don't
it's-
actually use the garages much.
You don't see very often two people in a car trying to, driving around the block, trying to find a parking space in Goose Hollow. So the word is pretty much out that there isn't going to be one.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
So,
Oh, I have a question.
yeah, Commissioner Hardesty, you bet.
Thank you. Now, how do you engage your community? You sit on this oversight committee. You have a responsibility to bring information back to your community. How does that process work today?
Basically, at the Goose Hollow Neighborhood Board level, I report monthly to the Goose Hollow Board. I also chair the Goose Hollow Planning Committee. And mostly the discussions of what's going on happen at the Planning Committee and at the Transportation Committee levels, because there really isn't time in a board meeting to get into an in-depth discussion.
And how does that get out to the neighbors in Goose Hollow? Do you do a newsletter or?
We have a very active website. There's a community, basically bulletin board. The mailing list of the Goose Hollow Transportation Committee is over 90 people, 90 households. There's a monthly newsletter from the board that accompanies the agenda that goes to all members of the neighborhood association.
I was just trying to get a sense for whether there was communication flow, and it sounds like yes.
We also talk with all the dog walkers and the parkers on the street.
How about you, sir? What's the process you use?
So I'm obviously the rep to the Oversight Committee. I sit on the NWDA board. I also serve on the Northwest Parking Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So I regularly update them on what's going on. We've actually advocated for them to participate in the Oversight Committee because they obviously have a strong interest and knowledge. And frankly, I'm not able to I wear multiple hats, but I can't testify on behalf of two different organizations at the same time. I would say that the SAC does quite a good job. It has used some of its budget to hire administrative support that does significant outreach, keeps all of its public information up to date. It is advisory to City Council, or at least to PBOT, such that it meets all of Civic Life's requirements for communications. So they do a very good job. NWGA, at their most recent board meeting, just passed our executive committee work plan, which calls for a communications group to improve what NWDA is doing. And I would just say that we're also advocating, not to get into the G&A issue, but we'd like to see more diversity on the group itself. It's it's 5 middle-aged white guys. I think we can do better.
I think we can too. Thank you for that. I will stop there. Thank you so much. Please reach out to my office. I'd love to have a deeper conversation. Thank you.
Good, and I just want to acknowledge the recommendations you made. I thought they were good ones in terms of more frequent meetings so that ideas can be shared more frequently than once a year. I like your idea of increasing the diversity and not only gender, race, age, but also inclusion of other interests in the neighborhood. And your third one was probably the most intriguing one, which is when we make a recommendation, how do we know it's being implemented and under what circumstances will it be implemented? So I thought those were all good points that you made, and I wanted to reflect that.
Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion unless there's any further discussion.
Second.
We have a motion to accept the report from Commissioner Hardesty, a second from Commissioner Udaly. Carla, please call the roll.
Hardesty?
So I'm torn, right? As I As last year, I was a little frustrated because I didn't believe that enough thought had gone into engaging the community. And it looks like we still have a lot of work to do to really have an oversight board that actually is representative and inclusive, and actually getting good data that then can be shared with the public. And so, Mayor, I'm going to vote yes, because I don't want you to pass out in your chair, because there's only 3 of us. And so if I didn't vote yes, this would just die on the vine. But I'm going to vote yes with a stipulation that I do want to know more about the Good Neighbor Agreement. I want to know more about what has been agreed to in the former plan that has not been implemented. And I do think that we have an obligation to hold this organization accountable for the impact that they're having on the neighborhood. And so there's a lot more work to be done before I will be satisfied with the reports that we're getting. But for the courtesy of my colleagues, I will vote yes today. As a protest vote, I'm voting yes, but I just know I wouldn't if we had one more body in this room. Aye.
Udaley.
Well, I also want to recognize that the parking has a real impact on local residents and businesses, and illegally parked cars block driveways and crosswalks and make the neighborhood more dangerous to navigate.
Do this.
The Timbers have agreed to step up and pay for expanded hours for 2 of the 4 parking enforcement officers, which is great. Thank you, Timbers. But I want to make sure that we're not just settling on a punitive approach, that we're really doing the kind of public outreach we need to do to educate the fans about all of their transportation options, in particular the underutilized off-street parking and increasing transit, bike, walk, and carpool. So let's keep working on that. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
I was very supportive of the Timbers and the Thorns seeking to expand the stadium, Peregrine's efforts to expand the stadium. And with that came the understanding that there would have to be a much more aggressive strategy around how people get to the games and how people get from the games. And I think this report is a step in the right direction. We're not there yet, though. And I agree with my colleagues' concerns about whether or not the incentives are right. Clearly, if you have on average 2,300 structured parking spaces going a-begging while everybody else is instead circling around the residential neighborhoods looking for a place to park, the balance is not correct, and the incentivization is not correct. And so I would look to progress on that between now and next year. And I want to be very clear, this cannot be a check-the-box exercise. You got the stadium, we supported the stadium, we agree it's a good public benefit for the community, but this piece of it remains very important to the people in the immediate proximity to the stadium. And so I think you can expect that next year we're going to ask even tougher questions than we've asked this year, because we've been very clear now about what our expectations are. You're collecting a lot of the right data. I look forward to seeing even more refined data next year. And I look forward to seeing improvement in those numbers, both in terms of the utilization of the parking facilities we have that are off-street, as well as an overall reduction. The mode split's great, though. I also want to acknowledge that. The mode split improvements, I think, are significant, and they show a lot of promise and a lot of hope. And I don't want to understate that in that regard, there's been some really impressive movement, and I want to acknowledge the hard work that you've done in that regard, too. I vote aye. The report's accepted. We'll take a 3-minute compassion break and be back. asbestos and lead-based paint can become airborne and threaten the health of residents in neighboring properties and of workers during demolitions. Until 2017, existing regulations exempted residential demolitions from most asbestos and lead-based paint requirements. In 2015 and 2017 respectively, the state enacted 2 bills to close these regulatory gaps. Using the authority these bills granted local jurisdictions, the City of Portland enacted a new residential demolition ordinance that created a first-of-its-kind program to address these contaminants effective July 1st of 2018. Since then, the Bureau of Development Services has been monitoring the program to determine what improvements need to be made. BDS staff have met with stakeholders, including representatives from federal, state, and local agencies, demolition, deconstruction, and asbestos lead-based paint abatement contractors, and the Development Review Advisory Committee, DRAC, Demolition Subcommittee over the past 6 months to review the program. This report summarizes the program, what worked, issues to be identified to improve the program, recommendations for amendments to the ordinance, and proposed next steps. To share the findings of this work, we have today Nancy Thorington and Mike Leafield from the Bureau of Development Services, Mary Helen Kincaid, the former DRAC chair and current chair of the DRAC Demolition Subcommittee, and Justin Wood, the current DRAC member and former DRAC chair. So with that, we will begin our presentation. Good morning, and I think Nancy's up first.
Yes, thank you. Good
you.
morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Nancy Thorington. I'm a Senior Code and Policy Analyst with the Bureau of Development Services. And as you know, also with me is Mary Helen Kincaid and Justin Wood. So we're here to report on the demolition ordinance that went into effect, and we'll provide a high-level overview of the ordinance and its implementation, and then take your questions. Before the council enacted this, as the mayor said, there were no regulations for dust and debris that contain asbestos and lead-based paint. Although DEQ had authority, it didn't have the staff to enforce those regulations. So working with the agencies and the stakeholders, we developed this ordinance, and through it, we and the accompanying administrative rules, BDS has been able to greatly enhance the protection of the neighboring properties by, first of all, requiring that plastic be laid down on the ground adjacent to the structures. And if you look at this slide, you'll see 2 different methods. If there's space, then it goes 10 feet out. And if there's not, if you look at the garage on the left-hand side, you can see vertical containment there that helps keep it off the neighbor's property if it's too close. The next way we've done this is by requiring that the exterior painted surfaces be removed. The decision was made by the stakeholders, including the regulators, when we were developing these rules, that most of the lead-based paint comes in the form of the exterior components, knowing that there still are some, components inside that are going to have lead, but this really provided the most efficient way of getting most of the lead off, and then knowing that the wetting and the site containment would deal with the rest of the lead. Then another way is by requiring that the dumpsters where they put the debris be lined with plastic, and what that does is it keeps the lead and asbestos from running onto the site. We also require that the equipment, the structure, and the debris be wetted down. So this is probably where the rubber meets the road on these regulations, because that's really where the neighbors get protected. You can see from this slide how that works. You basically put the water where the mechanical demolition is happening, and that really takes the dust right down. And then this is a picture of a wind speed monitor. If the wind speed exceeds 25 miles an hour, then no mechanical demolition can happen. And the reason for 25 miles an hour was we consulted with our subject matter experts, and they told us that basically that's the point at which they felt that the wetting would still keep the dust and the water on the site. And then finally, we do debris containment for the site. You can see from this slide, What they've done is they've put plastic around, and that keeps, obviously it rains here, plus you're wetting with the, with the hose, and that keeps it from going off the site, going into the gutter, going into the neighbor's property. And then this is just a brief timeline. I'm not going to go over the timepieces, before 2018, but it shows you how long we've been working on this project. Going from July 1st, 2018, when we began implementing the ordinance, it was, as the mayor said, a new first-of-its-kind program in the country, so we knew obviously we were going to need to come back and make some adjustments. So council asked us to come back January 1st with a report. And our staff's been documenting issues they've encountered on the site. We've been meeting with stakeholders, including the abatement contractors and the various agencies and DRAC, since May of 2019. And then based on this input, we've made some adjustments to the program, which Mike here will discuss, and we're making some recommendations for changes to the ordinance that I will review in a moment. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mike Liefeld. I'm with the Bureau of Development Services. And we wanted to run through a little bit more of those demolition permit highlights to get you up to speed to where we are today. So the first slide we're going to look at is prior to July 1st, 2018. This is just going to go over a high-level overview of the highlights. The local regulations, in addition to state building code for structural demolitions, our local regulations, if any, only applied to 1- and 2-family structures. We did have a demolition delay provision, which was an opportunity to provide housing preservation. The permit review was very simple. It was generally an over-the-counter permit after the 35-day demo delay period had ended. And there was some neighborhood notification. There was mailed notices mailed out to surrounding properties, and some door hangers were required to be posted only on adjacent properties to the demolition site. And then one inspection was completed. That inspection was completed after the demolition had been completed and all debris removed. So fast forward to July 1st, when we adopted the new changes to our local code, Title 24, our residential demolition code, and we see that we expanded the coverage. We now had our new regulations applying to 1 to 4 dwelling unit structures and accessory structures, so your garages, your carports. We looked at multi or mixed-use structures. Anything that had a residential dwelling unit was subject to our new language. The demolition delay still remained unchanged. The permit review process went to intake. We now had to take in the permits to ensure that the plan review is completed to make sure that all the pre-issuance requirements were met before issuing the permit. Neighborhood notification expanded. We continued to mail out notification to surrounding property owners, but a big increase was the door posting. So door notification was expanded to all properties within 300 feet of the demolition site. And the inspections changed. We introduced 3 inspections. One was an inspection to be completed prior to starting any demolition activity to make sure the site was set up with its containment measures. There was a during demolition inspection that was specified to be completed during the demolition work to ensure that site controls were being maintained. And we had a final inspection to make sure the site was all wrapped up in compliance with all the codes. Hallmarks of the new program on July 1st also included asbestos abatement. So this is where the city took an active role in ensuring that the asbestos survey required by DEQ was completed. We reviewed that asbestos survey, and then we also reviewed the abatement letter, the closeout letter, to ensure that that abatement had been completed prior to issuing a demolition permit. We had lead hazard reductions to ensure that high concentrations of lead were removed prior to mechanical demolition. This was accomplished by requiring hand removal of exterior painted surfaces with containment measures in place. That had to be completed prior to mechanical demolition occurring. And then we had the wetting, as Nancy discussed. The wetting was a key component for dust control. We didn't have that in code before this, so wetting before, during, and after is appropriate to control dust. So We have been implementing those measures since July 1st, and on February 10th, we had one additional change. As we were going through our update process and discussing changes, we heard concerns about the sequencing of the previous 3 demolition inspections. Given the various stages of demolition activity to comply with the lead hazard reductions and mechanical demolition wetting requirements, concerns were raised that the 3 inspections were not sufficient to verify critical site control elements throughout the project. As a result of multiple BDS stakeholder work group meetings that targeted specifically the inspection sequencing issue, BDS adopted a temporary administrative rule, which was effective on February 10th, 2020, to require 4 demolition inspections on every job. So if we look at the slide, post-February 10th, we've changed inspections to 4. So those inspections are really key to making sure that we've locked that inspection down to the gate of activity that needs to be verified at that time.
Commissioner Hardesty has a question.
Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt, but I'm curious about now that there's 4 inspections, does that drastically increase the cost of the permit?
The permit costs have not changed. We will be looking at permit fees as we introduced this as a temporary, almost emergency rule to make sure that we address that concern. We will be looking at any fees related to the additional inspections, but we also haven't covered that, but one element that we did introduce was a new live video inspection method in lieu of an in-person inspection.
that,
And if that is successful and widely used, that is going to help decrease costs.
I was going to say, because we don't want to actually increase the cost of getting a permit to do it the right way, right? So, yeah, please help us make sure that we're not overburdening people, because this is the right thing to do, so we should do it.
Right.
I also want to acknowledge your evolution on this. I think it's great, and there's been the policy, community feedback, media feedback, and you've changed the way you're doing it based on some of that feedback. My recollection is that some of the concern around inspections was definition and the importance of inspecting during the process. Tell me a little bit more about your thinking on that.
Right. So the previous ordinance used language of during demolition activity. And as I described, when you have the different elements, you have pre-demolition with making sure your containment measures are down. Then we have hand removal of exterior exterior surfaces. We have mechanical demolition. That all is within the spectrum of during demolition. And I think there was concern that there was an expectation that certain inspections were supposed to be locked in at elements of demolition, but we didn't have that same interpretation as we rolled out the new ordinance. We certainly heard that in fall of 2019 and immediately went to work setting up those meetings to get more information. And that's why those meetings solely focused on the inspection sequencing. So we could nail down everyone's expectation and intent on where those inspections needed to occur, work with customers to make sure that the inspections could work for the job, and figure out different ways to complete those inspections.
So tell me about the case that I read about where it's a small building and the demolition is I mean, it happens very, very quickly. How do you get I guess I get the pre-inspection and I get the post-inspection, but if it's a demolition that's going to happen very quickly, how do you actually get the interim 2 inspections in?
Well, there's always going to be the first during demolition that's required, and now it's very clear.
So they're not
that-
allowed to start the project without somebody being on site? How does that work?
Correct. So there's 2 during demolition inspections. One is a gate to make sure that mechanical demolition cannot start until we verify that all the exterior painted surfaces have been removed. That is a hard gate. It's loaded into the inspection system, and it would be a clear violation if they proceed without passing that inspection. Then they have some options about their timing. If they are confident that all those exterior painted materials have been removed, that they can stage the mechanical inspection to begin as soon as we give that approval, and we can then start to verify that the wetting is operational if they want to just move from one inspection to the next. But we also know that they have different people doing this work. Sometimes they'll sub out a deconstruction specialist to do the hand removal. Then they'll have an excavator come do the mechanical demolition, and sometimes those things don't line up perfectly. So we do treat that as that second inspection, that if they want to verify that all the exterior painted materials have been properly removed past that inspection, then they call in and schedule the next mechanical demolition inspection. That work cannot begin until that mechanical demolition inspection starts. They cannot start until we are on site. We verify that the wetting system is operational and in use. We are verifying that it is actively controlling any dust from the mechanical demolition, and that's how that inspection would be approved.
You said that as the live video feed reinspection process app comes online, and I understand it's already being used for re-inspections, plumbing, electrical, and some other stuff, I guess, that you'll move more in that direction for expediency. But for the time being, are you still on the site physically?
So the video option is live. So that was live on February 10th, and I think word's getting out. But that is an option in lieu of an in-person inspection. So what we heard through our work group meetings was the trade-off, the balancing between the time delays. So when we do in-person inspections, we're not able to give time certain, and we heard that was a big concern for people doing the work. If they've rented a water truck, if they've rented equipment out there, they need certainty to make sure that they can start the job rather than waiting until 8 in the morning to find out that as we plan out our geographic routes to maximize our inspector resources, that we may not get out there until between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. So we created this video option to say, can video technology help us? Because that's an easy inspection if we don't have all the drive time and traffic. And so that was live on February 10th. It's available for all customers who want to use it.
Great. Thank you for that innovation. I appreciate it.
Mayor,
Commissioner Daly.
I'm going to have some questions and comments, but I wanted to, I think, let you finish before do you have much left? Or?
I really don't, because that
Okay.
really covered the last elements that I was going to provide. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks. I just want to take a moment to put this into context. We actually didn't have the ability to regulate lead paint in residential demolitions until Senator Denbrough sponsored SB 871 in 2017. 4 months later, my office developed and advanced the ordinance that we're talking about today. It's something that's very close to our hearts. My chief of staff has a child who experienced high lead exposure in early childhood. And so we know in our office the detrimental effects, although this child doesn't seem to have sustained any long-term injuries. Lead exposure can cause permanent brain damage in children, especially children ages 1 to 5, but in people into their early 20s, because believe it or not, our brains are still developing in our early 20s. So lead exposure is a solvable problem. It's impacting millions of people across our country. There's no lack of sound science. There's been a lack of political will. And so I'm very grateful to Senator Denbrough and to Council for supporting this ordinance. Now we have to ensure that our intentions are actually enforced, because the rule doesn't actually protect anyone from exposure. So I feel fairly clear that we've resolved this confusion around that second inspection. So I just want to summarize to make sure there's no ambiguity. In order to demolish a residential structure currently covered by city code, you must first remove the siding, doors, and windows. You then must get your wetting equipment ready, and then you wait for a BDS inspection before demolishing. Is that a correct description?
Yes, they have to remove all the painted surfaces, and that has to receive an inspection to verify that all of the painted material covered under our rule has been removed. and they are not able to start mechanical demolition until either a live video or an in-person inspector is at the site verifying that the wetting system is operational as mechanical demolition begins.
Great. And with the new administrative rules, will there ever be a case where a demolition occurs before the second BDS inspection happens?
It is possible. So, you know,
But not
so
legal?
Not legally.
Not legally, right? So I come from the enforcement world, and
Yeah.
I can never guarantee you that I can ensure
I should have
with
phrased
any
that a little
measures
differently.
that we
Yeah.
can have 100% compliance, but I do think we've set up the right systems,
Yeah.
the right communication, so the information is clear, and we have a very strong enforcement response that can deal with those one-off situations, which what I hope is a one-off situation.
And then what kind of documentation is available afterwards if people want to review it for compliance?
So when we perform inspections, all of our inspection results are entered into our Amanda 7 database, which the public has access, and you can view inspection results on Portland Maps online. Those are, you know, not approved, approved with corrections, and you can see correction notices. In addition, my team of inspectors, we also create photo logs. We do inspection documents that are attached within that Amanda 7 software. So those are available that the public can see. They're not available online yet, but they're available on our public terminals.
We do, just so you know, Commissioner Udaley, we have a link to a demolition map on our website that you can actually zero in on the property itself. And you could, you know, if you didn't know the permit number or, you know, the address or that information, that would give you the start to then be able to give us the information to get, you know, deeper in.
Okay. And then my final question is, how soon will you conduct an internal review to see if the changes you've made are working or if further revisions are needed to ensure the intent of the ordinance is being followed?
So we're going to be, our recommendations are, you know, we're in the report, we're going to be looking to amend the ordinance as it is now. There's some language in there that that we know needs to be worked on, and we plan to come back. The report said in March, but obviously with a 4-week turnaround time, that's not going to happen. So it'll be, we would shoot for April. I've drafted that to come look at that, but we haven't, you know, we would like to hear from you if you want us to come back within a certain period of time to do a follow-up on that, you know, probably when we, you know, if you accept the report and the recommendations, when we come back with that ordinance, if you then want us to do a check-in in a certain period of time, then, you know, just let us know and we'll
Sounds good.
do that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. First, let me just say how impressed I am with the process that you've used to engage the public that's most impacted, whether it's developers or whether it's neighbors. I just really appreciate seeing the timeline and seeing the evolution. And so it's rare to like know what happened at the beginning, especially if you get here midstream, right? So first, I want to say that I'm very impressed with the work that you've done and where you're headed. I have a couple of questions, however. Why is 4 the magic number? What if there's 26 apartment complexes that the building's being torn down? What happens then?
It's just a distinction between residential and commercial. I meant to mention that because it sounds like we only care about buildings with 4 units or
Right.
less, but the Senate bill was specifically pertaining to residential. I would love to hear what the rules are for those commercial
I was
properties,
headed
though.
that way
Yeah.
too, yes. But
Yeah,
first-
the commercial properties have not been included, and technically, under the code, it's really bizarre, but 1 and 2 is residential, 3 to 4 is technically under the commercial code, but part of what prompted it to go to 4 was there were conversions, and that just is a number like a fourplex tends to be, you know, more small residential, and so it was easier to work with. The reason that we haven't moved over to the commercial side, there are a couple of reasons. One, this was such an issue in Portland because there were so many residential demolitions happening. If you look in the report, you can see on the commercial side, the 3 to 4s, there were only like 7 that happened in the whole time. And the rules are different as they apply to the commercial structures. The asbestos and the lead-based paint regulations are different, and we didn't have the right stakeholders because we had residential in the demolition subcommittee. We had people like Justin, who, is a residential contractor. And so if we were given direction to then move to look at the commercial, we would change the stakeholder group to reflect people who do that work.
Do we have a sense for whether or not we have a lot of commercial buildings that have lead paint and asbestos in the walls? No, we got a lot of URMs around here. I don't know about asbestos.
Yeah, I mean, the asbestos, certainly in the older buildings, yeah. I mean, like if you were demolishing a school, the way asbestos works is if it's airborne, that's where the problem comes, which, hence the dust reduction. But if we were given direction to look into the commercial realm, we would certainly do that. And, because again, some of the things here, you're not gonna put, tags on 300 surrounding properties if you're in downtown. That doesn't make any sense. So some of the pieces that we have here, or, the site containment pieces, don't make sense in a commercial situation.
I think that if we're going to have a standard, it shouldn't matter whether it's a residential standard or a business standard, right? But if we want to make sure that as those buildings come down, why would we not want to have a commercial standard? Anyway, I have one more question, which is the fines for non-compliance, in my perspective, are very low. So when the first offense is $5,000, the second is $10,000, and the third is $15,000, for many folks who do a lot of development, that's pocket change, right? I think if somebody's violating our policy, they should feel it. We make poor people feel it, so we should make other folks feel it as well. And so, is that always been the fine, or is that a new proposal?
That's been the fine since we started this program.
And what is that based on?
Well, that was based on, talking with developers and, the cost of doing it right versus the fine. And, I don't know, Justin, if you have any other pieces to add to that.
Well, the only thing I will say to the cost of the fine is one of the things we were trying to be somewhat sensitive to is if you look at the report where you can see that the number of violations, currently you can fail an inspection based on the inspection code you call in for various things, like not having straw down, which is just a mud erosion issue that doesn't necessarily pertain to lead and asbestos, is grouped into the same inspection category. Not having a sign up, not doing something. And so the question is, where we're trying to delineate between, is a first offense $5,000 fine for somebody who was trying to do the right thing but missed a small step? Do they still get hit with that $5,000 fine? Should they get hit with a $20,000 fine for a small piece? And how do you compare that against somebody who was deliberately really trying to to cheat the system?
Yes, and how would you?
Well, and that's where, and I think, and that's a hard one I think on some levels, if you were going to do something, is there a punitive step or a civil step that can be taken in addition to the fines for somebody who's actively trying to cheat the system? And I know, for example, you also, if lead and asbestos, if somebody's purposely not doing things right, you can also bring in, DEQ and OSHA and various other things. So there's extra steps that can be taken to punish somebody who's really trying to not do things right.
They'll have their new house built by the time that happens. But thank you, I appreciate. So, I guess my question is, so if the fine was like, let's say $20,000, and then there was a appeal process where somebody could make the case for, I was really trying to do the right thing, and actually this is what happened, right? Then that would allow for some flexibility. But my experience has been is that people do a cost analysis, right? Is it cheaper for me to just pay the fine, or do I do the right thing because it's the right thing to do? So we don't have to decide it today, but I hope that you'll consider that as you're moving forward and finalizing this new information.
Yeah, that's a good point, and part of that was actually part of the monitoring process. We put those fines in place, and then part of it is looking at it. Were we seeing a lot of intentional violations? And I mean, this is Mike's program, but my experience is that we haven't seen a lot.
I would echo that. I think as with a new program, as I described, we went from a paper permit, a one-page permit that was done over the counter, to a new intake with multiple inspections. And part of it was communicating the new expectations out to the customers. So we haven't experienced a rush of enforcement actions that would tend to support a number of bad actors in the community. That just hasn't been our experience. And the $5,000 starting point is very high for a civil penalty that BDS has for all other enforcement. So compared to our other enforcement responses, it is elevated quite a bit. I'm not saying if that's the right fit or not. It just in comparison to other fees. And I can tell you that folks do care because they do call and they do appeal. So that is happening already, which tells me that the $5,000 starting point is getting their attention, which is the goal, but we can certainly discuss if that is the right number.
Thank you. And I guess my last question is, I asked you about whether you were raising a permit fee, and I see you've actually raised it to $180. And is that a new as compared to before you come back with this report? Is that in place now, or is that something that you're adding on?
That was in place as of July 1st, 2018.
Okay. Thank you all. And again, really good work. I really appreciate watching the evolution of the work that you've done. It's wonderful to be able to see that we're both listening and adapting and testing, and then making good decisions based on that. So thank you all.
Thank you. If I think Justin and Mary Helen wanted to say a few words.
Sure. I'm going to give you more reason to say good things. I'm the oldest one that's been here the longest, and so I want to give you just a little perspective that this started out of neighborhood meetings over the original demolition code. A woman by the name of Kimberly Kohler and the East Moreland Association came to DRAC and said, this is crazy, you need to do something, not about demolitions, but about hazardous materials. And probably Robert McCullough's name is familiar to you. He jumped on the bandwagon, and he and I and Jeff Fish, a former DRAC chair, said, let's go out and listen to the community. So we did. And what we heard was keep our citizens safe. And so we convened this group, and you'll find this amusing, maybe. I went to then Director of BDS, Paul Scarlett, and said, you need to get all these people together. And I came up with a big, long list of 14 different agencies, EPA at the top of the pile. He said, I can't tell those people to come to a meeting, but if you ask them, I'll give you a room. So I started out, and Jeff and I asked them. They came to a room. It was a snowy day in January, in January 2015, and they came to the room. Everybody had a different avenue. I mean, there are so many people with so many tentacles into this. Perry Cabot at Multnomah County was a lead person on a lot of this because he had an interest and a connection with Senator Dembro about how we handle hazardous materials in construction. And so that's how that came, and it kind of ran parallel. Because there were DRAC members involved and because BDS had supported this, it sort of became known as the DRAC Demolition Subcommittee. But it really was a working group. It's like, how can we get all these pieces together in a room to come out with something good? And I can't do the math. 5 years later, we have, I believe, something good that the number one goal of everybody was to keep people safe and find the best way to do that. This ordinance is one of its kind in the United States. Need to take pride in that the city and staff did that. No one was ever officially appointed. When we brought the first demolition code slash asbestos to council, they said, come back and tell us how you do in a year, and, oh, by the way, add the Landmarks Commission. So it was kind of, we added one more person to the talk. I think that Baltimore and Detroit have much watered-down versions of what we have. It's just sort of you need to do something and have fun doing it. I think that the DRAC members have participated and led this in a number of different ways, but there's been many other citizens, and I just kind of wanted to recognize a couple of them because they were instrumental. That UNR and Al Ellis and John Sandy did a great amount of work and advocacy on the behalf. And the EPA, that people even commented that how we got them to come from Seattle to come to a meeting in Portland was amazing. And the number of staff that have been supportive, that have want to do this, so that I've done a lot of stuff in a lot of different avenues in Portland civic work, and I think this is one of the best processes, result that I've seen. Wasn't always pretty, wasn't always nice, and being a DRAC chair, and Justin can speak to this if he wants, well, it most often had a target on their check. And me especially, because I was a neighborhood person who was friends with the business community. But
imagine that.
yes, but I mean, that was terribly surprising to some people on both sides. You know, we're going to listen to her, and she's going to go to lunch with them or whatever. So I think that.
The same issue, yeah. People
Yeah.
tell me the same thing, right?
Yeah.
That never happens to me.
No, no.
My apologies for interrupting.
And then if you want even more experience, come to a Levy Ready Columbia meeting, and then you can really take shots from all sides. So I really want to commend the city staff for doing this, for all the city council people that came along this way, because everybody had to support it because it was contentious, it wasn't pretty, and it was terribly hard to understand. If you wanted to say, 6 years ago, who handles hazardous materials? I don't think any one person would give you the same answer. The EPA to the OHA to the CCB, I mean, I learned so many acronyms, I don't even know all the ones I learned. And working with Marshall and the issue with his daughter was, I think, a really good, I don't want to say poster child, but it was a really good live example of this is what can happen if we ignore this, and people wanted to do that. And then lastly, that has nothing to do with this, thanks for leaving Nick's name card up there. It kind of makes me feel a little bit stronger today, so thank you.
Thank you. Mayor.
Yeah, please, Commissioner Hurst.
I just want to say that was the part that I left out, right? Bureau staff can do great work, but they can only do great work if they're working in partnership with the community. And so you have done a remarkable job of actually reminding us that long before legislators start passing legislation and long before bureaus start trying to figure out the problem, there are people out in the community like you saying, we got a problem and we got to fix this. And then, so I just want to applaud you because as someone who was, and still is, right, a community activist and somebody who, when you saw something wrong, started bringing people together, I appreciate that. And thank you for that reminder that we don't even know it unless somebody like you is out there advocating in the community saying, hey, wait a minute, like, look at this. Thank you.
I just want to tell you one example of that is I think, Commissioner Udaley, you were there at a Rose City Park neighborhood meeting where people just came unglued over demolitions. And I really thought that I was going to have to hold the chair up and protect myself. But then when you found out that it was this concern and people showed concern, I think that was great. You weren't the commissioner there. I think you were something involved in the neighborhood. But I think once people understood that they were being heard, I think that's the most important thing. So.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you.
Thanks for letting me just say a few things as well, Mayor and Commissioners. I know most of everything's already been touched on, and some of the questions I was going to touch on have already been asked. So I'm a pretty firm believer that about 95% of all the contractors that are doing this are trying to do the right thing, and so, but I know that there's bad actors out there, and so it's important to come up with these things to try to make sure that the bad actors don't cheat the system and try to get caught, and try to get around the system. So the process that we've all worked together on with Mary Helen at the helm and others, and the staff has done a great job. Mary Helen, for one, anytime that some new idea or process is brought up, she tends to always ask, "Well, why? What's the point?" Yeah, and so rather than just being overly responsive to things where there's not necessarily a need for it, and so I think the process we've gone through, and there's been suggestions or criticisms from, like she said, from builders or from the neighborhood advocates. I've representing the home builders. I've had builders, kind of push back on us for things we were doing as well. So on seeking compromise and working on these issues. So staff did a great job seeking builder input into the process and working with us, and also trying to figure out that, as you pointed out earlier, that some of these things do add costs and time delays, and trying to minimize that as much as you can. As Mike pointed out, the video inspection process, that is something that is available to us to help out. There's also, we've looked for other ways. For example, a small thing was that we used to have all of those reports in before we submitted for our 35-day demo delay. We've got that changed so that you can actually start your delay and submit those things while you're in your delay. So that does help, expedite the process when you're trying to get those things done. Just a couple things I want to point out that are not covered in here that are important points for us on the development community. For those, if you're not aware, anytime we demolish a house in the city or anywhere anymore, we can't take stuff to the landfill or recycling center to dump anything if it's not accompanied with a report and a testing. So they can't. So that's an important thing. And barring somebody taking the material out to Tillamook and dumping it in the forest, there isn't. You can't take your stuff to without it being tested and controlled. So that's another important piece to know, just so you guys are aware of that. And one thing that this has also done for a lot of us is, I know the deconstruction ordinance doesn't necessarily kicks in at really older homes, but what we have found in a lot of our cases and working with our demolition people is a lot of these processes are pushing us to more of a deconstructed house anyways, just because by the time you hand remove the siding, you hand remove the asbestos, you hand remove the lead, half the house in a lot of cases is already hand demolished. And so by that time, we're finding it's not that much more effort to just complete the deconstruction process. And then all that's left is just the mechanical removal of the foundation. So that's an important piece. And the other thing I want to add that I hope when we continue on this process, and this isn't in the recommendations now, but from my perspective, Mary Helen and I were joking about the fact that we've gone through all these things to mitigate lead and asbestos, yet she lives in Northeast Portland and I have an office in Northeast Portland, and not picking on anybody involved with Portland Meadows, but we watched the plume of stuff come up from Portland Meadows when it was mechanically demolished a couple weeks ago. Because they're not subject, and I'm not picking on BDS because that's not the law, but they're not subject to any of the rules that we are currently. So, so that is something that I hope when we continue this process, we look at that as well. We were building a house last fall where the neighbor next door to us was pressure washing his house, and I just watched the lead chips falling off the side of his house and right onto the ground, and that's not regulated, and I realize that's hard to do on private homeowners, but that's just as dangerous. And so that's something, and that may be an education. I don't know how you get after private stuff, but that's something we consider. And then I also, it was mentioned earlier that our current inspection process, the way our system works, the code that we enter to call in for an inspection is the same code that's called an interim erosion control inspection. And that can actually just be for having your straw down, having your fencing around the property for mud and all those things. And so you can get a little bit of a inflated report on how many inspections fail, that if you just look at it, that you might think that has to do with demolitions or with the lead, because they're grouped together. So I hope that currently there are some limitations on that in the systems, but I hope that we can continue to work on figuring out a way to separate those so that you don't kind of get commingled data.
So let me ask you a question. This issue of commercial demolitions has come up now a couple of times during this presentation. I think it sounds like from our questioning, we're happy with the work you're doing on the residential side, and we're pleased with the evolution of your thinking, the use of technology, the increased requirements around accountability. Those are all great steps in the right direction. But hearing about this plume over Northeast Portland concerns me. What is the city's role in commercial demolitions?
Our code doesn't require anything special, and we don't look at what the EPA or, the DEQ rules are.
Why not?
Can I just, Chris Zimmer, who works for OSHA.
Yeah.
That protects construction workers in construction, once told me that that was the only hook that the state had unless state legislators worked to change that.
Are
They
we
can contract the
preempted?
They can, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, and if he's watching, he'll probably slap me. But they can protect the construction worker, and that equates into protecting other people.
Maybe.
I don't know
But
how.
my concern
Yeah,
isn't
I
just
got
the
the
people
same
doing it.
question.
My concern's the people in
No, I mean,
proximity as well.
I drove by and I was just kind of like alarmed because I knew other people were upset that Portland Meadows had been torn down.
All right, well, this is not part of your report today, but
No.
it's something I want to follow up on. 'cause
Sure,
it's
and,
concerning to me.
to most directly answer your question, we aren't the regulatory authority. That was the thing that SB 871 gave to us, because we didn't have the regulatory authority until SB 871 said, okay, local jurisdictions, you now have the authority to do this. And OHA, you're going to develop, a list of best practices that local jurisdictions can choose from. So
Have they done that?
Yeah, oh, yeah, we've been working with them, yeah, that's part
On
of
single
this whole
fam-
process.
On residential stuff, though.
On the residential stuff. So the next step would be for you to direct us to look into the commercial regulations, and we would, I guess, work with the city attorney's office to see what's out there and what the
Well,
options
I'd
are.
certainly like to know more. I mean, you raised it twice during the presentation, and it's concerning to me, and I'm sure people listening into this are concerned about it.
Yeah, that was
I mean, here we are worried about the
It's
guy
more than this one
tearing
concern.
down his garage, and meanwhile, there's a plume over northeastern
And it's
Portland.
property zone, commercial, so
Yeah.
if you live in a house, let's say across the street from New Seasons, and they tear it down, a building down in that area, and that it would, so there, yeah, somebody needs to look.
You need a microphone.
Okay, good, sorry.
I'm
All right.
just, I agree, and there's neighborhood concern that it should be looked into. But I hate to say this, it's somebody else's job at this point, except now I've told you out loud in a city council.
Yeah, no, it's concerning to me.
More work for you, apparently, right? But on the same token, right, we have schools in our city that are being remodeled, right, and being made earthquake safe. Are we sure that we don't have asbestos and lead paint inside our very old school buildings?
Sure we do.
There probably is asbestos in there. And there are DEQ and EPA requirements for how they are supposed to handle those. It's just that that also means that DEQ is the regulatory authority. So we don't have jurisdiction to go in there with our staff because they're not our regulations.
And it's been my experience in the little bit of stuff that I have seen that typically the larger the project gets when you're in schools and things like that, that the more oversight there is from DEQ and OSHA and various other things, ensuring that your workers are properly protected. For example, typically OSHA doesn't show up on one single-family residential house driving through a neighborhood, but if there's a large project with a couple hundred people working on it, they'll typically go by and do job site corrections, make sure things are flowing the way they are. So I think there is a little bit more oversight and involvement on larger projects.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Commissioner Daly.
I just want to chime in with my support for exploring commercial regulations. That seems like a huge gap in our regulation of this issue. And I'm also interested what we could do about the private property issue. No one should be pressure washing, chipping lead paint. It's damaging to the wood, and it's potentially harmful to the person doing it and anyone nearby and the soil that all that paint is falling on, so.
Good. I'll entertain a motion.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Hardesty, second from Commissioner Daly to accept the report. Carla, please call the roll.
Hardesty?
There's not on the list here.
Aye.
Daly?
Well, as a former commissioner in charge of BDS, I worked hard to ensure that we're protecting the health of our residents. Lead dust is a serious public health threat, especially to children. It can cause a host of health issues, including permanent brain damage. As a city, we have an obligation to protect all of our children from this threat. I'm encouraged to see the steps we've continued to take to treat this public health threat seriously. As staff mentioned, or sorry, not staff, as Mary Helen mentioned, this is the strongest demolition protection in the country, and I'm proud of the work we've done. But it's only as strong as our ability to enforce it. It's no accomplishment to have the strictest protections on paper if we fail to enforce them on the ground. It's been more than 2 years since City Council passed the ordinance and more than 18 months since it went into effect. It pains me to think how many residents have suffered from preventable exposure during this time. I am, however, encouraged by the new rules and the direction the Bureau has taken to make sure we're protecting households from demolition-related health risks. The purpose of the residential demolition ordinance when I sponsored it was to protect people, particularly children, from asbestos and lead dust and debris from demolition. When BDS comes back with revisions to remove details from the ordinance to place an administrative rule, I'll be looking closely to how we can ensure that these protections will be upheld and that we won't be back here again down the road hearing that we have not met our goals. I vote aye.
Wheeler.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for your testimony. I thought it was fantastic. It was interesting. It was a provocative report. I know you've spent a ton of time and energy on this. I'm very pleased with the progress that you've made. I'm very happy to vote aye. The report's accepted. Thank you. Next up is time certain item number 165 and 166, please.
165, consider removal of a condition of approval imposed by prior comprehensive plan map and zoning map amendment ordinance at the request of Allison Reynolds of Stoll Reeves LLP and the recommendation from the hearings officer for property at 1710 Northeast Multnomah Street, LU 19-223221CP. And 166, remove a condition of approval imposed by a prior comprehensive plan map and zoning map amendment ordinance for property at 1710 Northeast Multnomah Street at the request of Allison Reynolds, Stoll Reeves LLP, LU 19-223221CPZC.
Colleagues, this barn burner is a zone map change, which must be done by ordinance. We've approved the amendments to reflect the condition that will require at least 100 dwelling units when the site's redeveloped. Today, we'll take a final vote on the findings in the ordinance as amended. Is there any further discussion? Not seeing that, thank you. Do I have a motion for a final vote on the findings in the ordinance as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Hardesty.
I want to again put my appreciation on the record for the willingness of the owner and their advisors to commit to a number. 100 is a good number. Maybe there'll be more, but at least 100 is a good start. I really, really appreciated this process. Most of the time, I think when we have these hearings, it feels like a us versus them. And I think this one was a great example of hearing what the concerns were and being responsive to those. So I'm happy to vote aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Well, I'm pleased to see the council be able to add this condition of approval. And Allison, I want to thank you, Allison Reynolds, in particular, and her client. I want to thank the BDS staff, Bureau of Development Services, as well as my colleagues for working to come to a compromise and a final condition that makes everyone happy. It's a true win-win-win. I love it when that happens. I'm happy to vote aye. The ordinance, well, actually, no, the ordinance is adopted, and we also have to do 166, just for the record.
Roll call 166.
Please.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaley.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Ordinance is adopted. Thank you, everyone. Next item, regular agenda 167.
Amend contract with HDR Engineering, Inc. for additional construction support services for the Columbia Boulevard wastewater treatment plant renewable natural gas facility, project number E10033 for $229,000. And they also requested
Yeah,
168.
168, if you could read that as well, it's related.
168, amend contract with McClure and Sons, Inc. for additional compensation to complete additional contract work due to design modifications and change conditions for the Columbia Boulevard wastewater treatment plant renewable natural gas facility, project number E10033 for $4,452,012.
Colleagues, around Earth Day 3 years ago, City Council authorized an innovative project to step up our climate challenge. The goal is a triple win: climate, clean air, and revenue. The Bureau of Environmental Services calls it the Renewable Natural Gas Project. Our late good friend, Commissioner Fish, based on his son's suggestion, gave it a more memorable name: Poop to Power. This project will create clean, local, renewable fuel out of processing Portlanders' sewage. It'll be used to displace dirty diesel in commercial vehicles. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability has determined that the RNG project will be the city's largest climate infrastructure project, reducing carbon pollution by 21,000 tons each and every year. Construction is close to the finish line, with testing expected this spring and startup this summer. Here today with a presentation on the contract amendments are Paul Sudo, the engineering manager, and Darren Wilson, the engineering supervisor, both with Environmental Services. And I want to reiterate that this was a great passion and interest of Commissioner Fish and his team, and I'm sorry he's not here today to share this great success
He's here.
with all of us. And he is. Thank you. He is. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Hardesty, and Commissioner Udaley. For the record, I'm Paul Sudo, Engineering Manager with BES.
Good afternoon, and I'm Darren Wilson, Engineering Supervisor with BES.
Thank you.
You can move that mic anywhere that makes it more comfortable so you don't.
You can
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Commissioner. Thank you.
So we're here today to ask for approval to increase the budgets of two contracts associated with the Columbia Boulevard wastewater treatment plant's renewable natural gas facility that is currently under construction. So Mayor Wheeler mentioned the triple win. This is the slide we had prepared about 3 years ago at that Earth Day event with the goal to produce renewable natural gas as a vehicle fuel from the solids or poop. This presentation may contain the word poop a few more times, so just, I know it's around, yeah, it's around lunchtime, so I just want to caution folks on that. So
It never gets old.
It never
gets old.
All right.
Dorky enough to keep laughing.
So the main things are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, so about 21,000 tons of climate-changing emissions per year. Adding revenue for ratepayers with this investment as well by selling it as a vehicle fuel. And also providing clean air benefits. So one thing I want to highlight on this slide is this 154 garbage trucks a year, that's just to provide a scale of how much fuel we're actually producing or able to produce at the plant. And that's for illustration purposes. We don't have a specific plan to have 154 garbage trucks, so I just want to clarify that. And I also want to mention from the staff standpoint too that we recognize this was a very important project for the late Commissioner Fish, and we are sad that he's not here with us to see us at the finish line. But it was really heartwarming to know that this was one of his favorite projects at BES. And so with that, so here he is at the media event for one of the elements of the project that's already been completed, and that's the compressed natural gas fueling station at Columbia Boulevard. And now I'll get back to the project. So just kind of reiterate some of the stuff that was discussed about almost 3 years ago. So our main goals for moving forward with this project were based on maximizing the methane recovery of the biogas that's produced at the plant as wastewater solids are treated, and maximizing value to ratepayers, so from a business sense, and optimizing our return on investment, looking at a balance of risk and reward, and also to make sure we're aligning with the city's policies in terms of the climate action plan in particular, but also other ones that have been developed. So now kind of this is the fun part for me to talk more about how the poop turns into gas here. So the gas is essentially is produced in the anaerobic digesters at the wastewater treatment plant. Those are large tanks where the poop in the sewage goes and gets separated out, and then we have an optimized process there that's heated to produce the biogas. So tiny bacteria convert these solids or poop to methane gas, carbon dioxide, and some other trace compounds. So that's where this project has stepped in, is to take that biogas, add facilities to increase the quality of that biogas so we can put it into the pipeline and distribute it for vehicle use as an end use. So I want to highlight here that renewable natural gas is not a fossil fuel. All right, so this slide here shows our current biogas utilization at Columbia Boulevard. And this is before the RNG facility comes online later this year. So just some points to highlight here. We're sending about 23% to our waste gas burners, which are essentially our flares. So that's what kind of initiated this project, was that we were still flaring gas, even though we were beneficially using with our cogeneration facility, which is producing power and heat for process use, our process boilers, which were focused on heat use, and then also selling a portion of the gas to a local industry down the road from us. So the other thing I want to highlight here is, as this project's developed, we've gone from focusing on that 23% flared as a vehicle fuel to all of the gas. So we're actually going to be focusing on taking all the gas on average produced at Columbia Boulevard, putting it into pipeline quality, because we looked at from a triple bottom line benefit, that's the best value for us. So this aerial/cartoon graphic illustrates how poop to power is being built. If you follow the kind of the cartoony part of it up top, it shows the biogas in the large tanks, the digesters. So just to give you an idea of how big they are, they're about over 2 million gallons of solids in each one of those, and we have 6 main ones there on the left-hand side. And they produce a tremendous amount of gas, about 1.6 million cubic feet a day at the plant. And the green, then we ship to the new facility being built, shown in green here. That's the biogas upgrading, or the RNG facility. And that's been kind of, hopefully you can appreciate here too how tight the site is, and we basically shoehorned it into that corner of the site. I got some other photos later to highlight how challenging that's been. And then we produce the natural gas. We get it into the main distribution line with Northwest Natural. And then once it's in the line, that gives us the options to use it at off-site fueling stations with other partners, and then also utilize the facility that's been built on site at Columbia Boulevard for use of the RNG as a fuel. So here I just want to highlight, some of the alignments with the Climate Action Plan and the city's other energy goals. So in 2015, there was a Climate Action Plan update to set a new objective to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by the year 2030, and then further that to 80% by 2050. So this is a project that helps actually get results to help move us there. And there's also another objective associated with that by the year 2030 to reduce life cycle carbon emissions of transportation fuels in particular by 20%. And then finally, the RNG project adds an additional renewable fuel that can help meet the 100% renewable resolution goal for transportation sector fuels, where the goal is 100% by the year 2050. And this photo here just shows a mystery person fueling a CNG vehicle at the Columbia Boulevard treatment plant. All right, so I'll just touch on a couple more on the clean air side with the triple win. The project helps the city meet goals for clean air by providing a renewable clean fuel option to help improve air quality and as an alternative fuel for clean fleet requirements. And then the other thing I want to highlight here is that the project also furthers resiliency goals for the city by producing a fuel locally and therefore reducing the reliance on transportation of fuels into our region during a significant event, for example, like a seismic event. All right, so now kind of tying that all together with the triple bottom line benefits, the win for the climate, revenue, and clean air. And so I'm kind of restating some of this stuff, but I just want to give another equivalency for that 21,000 tons annually for climate benefits with our colleagues over at Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. I got an analogy that is the equivalent of about 10 years of tree growth in Forest Park sequestering carbon. So just to appreciate from a climate benefit there. And then the revenue, we've got a plan for selling it as a vehicle fuel through federal and state programs. And we're expecting revenue in the range of $3 to $8 million per year on the project. The current market, we're around $5 or $6 million a year if we hit go really soon for it. But it's market-based, so it can fluctuate. And then finally, on the clean air benefits, by displacing the dirty diesel fuel and reducing public health risks.
So could you go back, please, to that map? What is the projected revenue based on?
The projected revenue is based on sales of the gas that's being upgraded and produced as an RNG. So it's based on essentially 3 funding areas, so to speak. So the first one is selling the fuel as a commodity to Northwest Natural, so they don't have to import natural gas from other parts of the country and other regions. So that helps them. And then we've partnered with a company called Clean Energy Renewable Fuels that will essentially market our gas and be responsible for the sales. And they're the ones that will basically leverage the federal program, the Renewable Fuels Standard that's administered by the US EPA, where programs like this, we have a fuel that generates credits essentially, that essentially oil-producing manufacturers and importers, they basically have an incentive to either produce their own renewable fuels or purchase renewable fuels. So there's definitely a demand for renewable fuels. So that's at the federal level. Do you have a follow-up on that?
Go ahead.
Okay. And then at the state level, in both Oregon and California, there's a low carbon fuel standard. So that doesn't necessarily focus on renewable fuels. It's low carbon fuels, and most renewable fuels tend to be low carbon fuels. So we've got revenue from those state programs as well. And that's what I want to highlight there is that's an either or. So we're either going to be going to California or Oregon. So we have revenue from selling the base commodity to Northwest Natural, the federal program, and then either Oregon or California. So that's what that number that I mentioned, that about 5, once you add all that up. So right now, I think the quick check I did beforehand, that commodity is roughly a little bit more than $1 million a year. And right now, the federal and the state programs are about the same in terms of revenue for us, so about $2.5 million each, which gets us close to $6 million. So I do want to highlight the California market is more mature than the Oregon one, but the Oregon market's catching up. So our goal in the long run is to make sure the fuel is sold locally. But we want to maximize the revenue for the ratepayers and get this facility paid for.
Not to mention wanting to have Oregon be more green as soon as we possibly can be, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. And are you negotiating a agreement on what we would sell this natural gas to Northwest Natural for? Or is there a standard whereby there's a market rate of gas? How does that work?
Exactly. So for the non-renewable, since Northwest Natural isn't getting the renewable rights to this, since we're selling it into the program, so there is a market price. It's called, the acronym is WACOG, the weighted average cost of gas, something like that. Okay. And it's prescribed essentially. It's a market-based one.
I know I'm getting into the details, but I thank you.
You're very welcome.
I'm nerdy like that.
Yeah.
I have to know. Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, so this is just kind of a status check, again, on what we're doing. So it's an aerial of the plant. So phase one, the CNG facility there on the lower, kind of the lower center left there is complete. The contracts that we're talking about today are focused on the production facility there. On the kind of the right-hand side, the bigger circle where the RNG facility is being built. And then in parallel with that, Northwest Natural is constructing a receipt facility or interconnection facility, which is basically a gatekeeping facility for monitoring the RNG that we produce so that it meets the standards of their system in place. So that's going on in parallel with our construction project. But they're building that, however, we're paying for it as part of the project.
Oh, we're paying?
Yeah, we're paying for it.
They're building it, but we're paying for it now?
Well, because we need it for our project to connect, but it's actually helping us that they're building it because they're kind of experts in building those types of facilities.
Right.
Yeah, so it actually is a good partnership for us.
Good question.
Yeah. Okay, so now to the contracts. That's kind of good background on the project. So let me catch up here too. The contracts requested for amendments today are for the design engineer, HDR, and for the construction contractor, McClure & Sons Incorporated. HDR was chosen as a primary engineering consultant back in 2013, so we've been working on this for a while now. We've been planning it even prior to that, so from a design standpoint and construction, it's been a 7-year journey for us. And then McClure & Sons was selected as a prime contractor back in 2017, shortly after the Earth Day event in April. So just want to highlight here on the photo, on the right-hand side, this is the, I don't know if you can see it, but there's 2 pipelines there along that fence line, a big gray one and a small yellow one. So those are the pipelines. And the bigger one is the biogas that's going to the facility that's in the back of the picture, those tall towers. And so that's where the gas is cleaned up, and then it comes back along that corridor in that smaller pipe because the CO2's been removed, and it's also under higher pressure, and then it connects to Northwest Natural system. So what I'd like to appreciate here is, again, the tight site constraints for building this. All right, so why do we need more money, right? That's why we're here. So essentially, the main categories have been, there's been equipment changes that we learned about once we got into construction, efficiency gains for methane recovery, the site constraints that I mentioned, and safety. So I'll talk more about those, but I want to kind of highlight the broader buckets first. So many equipment details became apparent once construction was underway and suppliers were submitting proposed equipment for review. This led to changes to integrate the equipment into operations for the plant and to provide consistency for maintenance staff to improve troubleshooting. A design addition was also made during construction to further improve the methane recovery efficiency, which also improved our revenue forecasts. And that's the equipment there you see on the top right-hand side. Basically, it's a vape called it's a pressure swing absorption is kind of the technical term for it. And then back to the site constraints, those were a result of installing the facility on the existing plant with not much footprint available to squeeze this in, and then also integrating that small footprint facility into the existing plant. And that's what, a little more of what we see there is on the bottom picture there is how tight with the fence line, and there's a hillside behind us, and then a roadway right there already. So not a lot of room to work with.
Well, I'm sorry, you didn't know the pipes before, that you had that limited space when you started this project?
We did, but it was once we started getting the actual equipment. So typically you design around certain equipment, and then it's a low bid environment. So we bid, and then the contractors submit types of equipment during construction. And then once we select that equipment, we typically have to make some field adjustments. And in this case, we just didn't have a lot of room there to make those adjustments.
But this will be the 7th adjustment that we've made to this contract. So I just know that that's the context under which I will be asking questions.
Got it. And I just want to clarify, so.
Which one are we on, 188? I'm sorry. You were just talking about the HDR engineering, right? That one? Okay.
Yeah, the HDR, so yes, the HDR one has had 7, yes. The McClure & Sons one, this would be the first adjustment on it. Then just, so I want to,
Nope. This will be 7.
on HDRs?
Yes,
Yes, HDRs. I just want to clarify on the construction contractor's side, this is the first one. Yeah. So the changes to improve safety were also identified during construction. BES had voluntarily held a study that identified safety improvement opportunities. The study assessed the hazard potential of operation outside the design intention or the malfunction of individual items of equipment and their consequential effects on the facility as a whole. So that also led to some changes to help us build a better, safer facility. Okay, so where are we right now? So we are in the final stages of construction, so we are kind of nearing the home stretch. I do want to highlight that we haven't spent all of the money for the construction contractor, McClure & Sons. We're at about 8.7 of the total million spent. And then we also need, HDR is the design consultant that's helping with designing the changes that we need to optimize the system, so we still need their support to get the project done. And this photo on the right here is one of those pieces of equipment that took a while to get on site and get in there, and that's the regenerative thermal oxidizer. So this just gives you an idea of the scale of the equipment that we've been working with. Okay, so the objectives of the amendment are to authorize funds to the construction contractor, McClure & Sons, for design modifications and change conditions that were not known during project design, and also to authorize funds to the design consultant, HDR, to continue processing project documents and aid in design and construction support services. And then we also need to extend the contract time until June 30th of 2020, when we've also got some contingency in there through September 30th of 2020. So just more on the photos here. So the top photo is the booster compressor. In the center there is a piece of equipment where you can see piping come from the digesters there on the kind of left-hand side, the large tank. That silver piping is the biogas coming from the digesters. And then the compressor basically pressurizes it, and then it gets pumped down to the RNG facility for treatment. And then in the lower picture there, that's basically all of the RNG facility right there at the towers for doing the primary polishing and treating, and then the second stage stuff is in that background area there. And then that large white building, essentially, that modular building, there's a lot more equipment in that as well. So hopefully at some point soon, there'll be some tours out there for folks to come and actually see us making renewable natural gas.
Yeah, make sure the poop is actually all taken care of.
Take care. Yeah.
I don't need to see that part.
That part, okay. That stuff we can't seem to give away for some reason. We try on our tours, but. So the McClure & Sons contract amendment is for a total of up to $4,452,012, and we have a moderate level of confidence rating there. The HDR contract amendment is for $229,000 with a high level of confidence rating there, and we've extended the construction schedule by 186 days.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. So I want to just stop you right there. So with the request for 168, sorry, bad glasses today. This is a 146% increase over what the original estimate was. And today you still only have a moderate level of confidence that you won't be back asking us for more. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Why?
And we typically use moderate because we're still under construction, and there could be something that happens that we're not aware of, since we are close, but there could be something that surprises us. So that's why we tend to be conservative and say moderate.
Well, I appreciate you saying moderate, but I'm concerned that if we add an additional $4 million and you only have a moderate degree of comfort that that is the right number. My concern is that you'll be back in 6 months wanting additional resources or wanting authorization for additional resources. So how do we know that we're on the right track and it's not gonna end up costing us another $10 million?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you can.
Yeah, so Commissioner, I think that's a really good question. The biggest issue that we have right now with our confidence level.
Could you move that mic down
Oh,
a bit so
sorry.
that, no, it's.
Yeah, the
there you
biggest issue we have with our confidence level is timing.
go.
As we get into startup, we've already usually spent the majority of the money on making the equipment changes, the piping changes, electrical changes. But when we get into the startup and testing, that's when we want to find out if all these various computers and sensors are going to actually play together nicely. And so it's possible that we'll end up having more time requirement. So the moderate level of cost is more related to the contractor's general conditions for their staff to be on site longer to help us make sure the system operates properly.
So this time, this is what this request is.
This request is anticipating both types of costs, equipment costs as well as some of the extra time for the contractor to be on site. And that's going to get us through that June period. If perhaps we have to go into September or possibly even later because we have other issues that we don't know yet, that's where we're telling you there's a moderate level. We would potentially have to reimburse the contractor for their staff time if we haven't done a good job programming those computers to work together.
And how are we going to make sure that you do that? That you
trying
program
very
those
hard.
computers to make
Yeah.
sure that we are good to go?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that we have incredible staff at the treatment plant, so we're doing the programming ourselves to make sure that our staff are familiar with the program, they can troubleshoot. We're extremely involved during startup and testing, and so we're pretty confident of that. But again, because this is different equipment than we normally use, our staff are used to treatment plant type equipment.
Right, right.
These types of equipments are more traditionally in the oil and gas production type of facilities, and we're just not experts in that.
Right. And is there a level of training of current staff as we move into this new system that needs to take place?
Absolutely. So one of the things we've done is we just had some staff fly out to Wisconsin to visit one of the manufacturers and actually go through all the factory startup and testing. And so again, we're developing relationships with the suppliers and the contractors. Our staff are becoming familiar. We have many conference calls that are recurring every week to make sure we're all tracking the issues and staying on top of things.
So I would just ask you, I appreciate that explanation, and it makes sense to me based on the fact that this is new and innovative and not something that we've tried before. But my request from you would be that if you get, it's like this runs through June of this year, right? If you get to, say, the 1st of April and you find out we got some sticky points here, I would advise you to reach out to our offices early, right? Because I would hate for you to come back and say, we're out of money and we need you to give us another $4 million, right? Because I would rather know ahead of time and know why we are doing what we're doing so that we can be supportive. This is an innovative program. I just want to make sure that the city benefits as greatly as Northwest Natural will benefit from this program. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Carl, did you have something else?
I had a few more, but I can just close. So this is the kind of the financial projections slide, with the total cost of the program. And just highlighting here, we're still on a track to pay back this facility in about 5 years. With the additional costs, we slipped from about 4 years to 5 years on the current market. So in the overall scheme of the payback, we're still within what we estimated in the beginning of 4 to 8 years. So I just want to mention that. And that includes the total program costs. So this is just really the closing side on our recommendations to authorize the execution of the HDR contract for $229,000 and also the McClure & Sons contract for $4,452,012. And close with the triple win again.
Positive.
Commissioner
I just remembered I had one more question. So how diverse is the workforce that's doing this project?
Yeah, I think we got some numbers here to explain that. One thing I want to highlight about this project, hopefully the picture is illustrated. There's a lot of equipment on this project. So let's say out of that $9 million or so of the original contract, I think something like $6 million or so was equipment, and the rest was labor. So
Gonna always own that equipment?
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
our equipment?
it's our equipment. Yeah. So to answer your question, or on the overall contract amount, let's say the DMW ESP participation for forecasting for where we're at is about 9.17%, 9.2% roughly. But if we take out the equipment and look at purely labor, it's about 23%. Is where
When you
we're,
come back, I'd love to have that broken down, disaggregated so that, like, how many women, like.
yeah, and I think we have, do we have that?
I'm not sure if we can get that from procurement, but we can certainly ask them.
Oh, you can, because I asked them.
Oh,
Yeah, you
great.
can.
Okay.
You mean in terms of if it's a,
Well,
what
women,
category?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be very
So-
helpful just
yeah, we could do
knowing
that.
what the breakdown is for that large number, yeah.
Great. Public testimony on this item, Carla.
Yes, we have 3 people signed up.
Very good. Name for the record, 3 minutes each, please.
Shedrick J. Wilkins, Lightning Super Karma, and Maggie.
Why don't we take, before we get to public testimony, let's take a 3-minute recess. Cedric, you were up first. Why don't you go ahead?
I'm Cedric Wilkins, and I like the word renewable energy. I like the fact, I think it's in June, there'll be this sustainability conference at the Hilton or something. I think this is kind of a feather in the cap to renewable energy. I especially like what I call the electric ring, which is the light rail trolley system where you can go to OMSI, go to the Lloyd Center, the Convention Center, Good Samaritan Hospital, you can go to the Central Library, Multnomah County Library, you can go to PSU, and end up back at OMSI, and not waste an ounce of gasoline. That electricity comes from the renewable electric dams on the Columbia River, built in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And that's great. I really have a problem sometimes with the American suburbs are car intensive. I don't know how that's going to end up someday, but at least there is this central area where people can just get on an electric thing which is powered by the dams. And this is a Columbia Sluice, so there's a Columbia River theme here. I will try to get involved. I think PGE is doing something at 12th Southeast Stark. They're making something where they're going to have solar panels, maybe charge up electric bicycles and things like that. I will, because of this, I probably will try to get involved with that.
The mobility hub.
Yeah, and I may volunteer for OMSI, and basically, there's things to point to here. So, and also 10 or 20 years ago, all this stuff we're talking about was just exhibits in OMSI. You know, they do this stuff in California, San Francisco. We don't do it here.
Thanks, Cedric. Maggie, would you like to go next?
I think he made several good comments there about the slow nature of government to get going on these projects. But I liked Hardesty's question about, you know, are you going to come and ask for more money? What's the diversity look like? And then he was talking about the computers interfacing with the mechanical stuff. And I was thinking back to that woman, I forget her name, she just died. She was 101. She worked for NASA as a mathematician. And remember, they had those computers and they brought them in, and none of the guys could operate them. And she figured out how to use them. Right. So I think we need, we've got enough STEM people, women, minorities in the STEM, to come in and make sure that those computers are interfacing properly with the mechanical equipment. So let's, make sure that there's diversity in the hiring there. And also, how much is the whole project going to be beginning to end so that we can decide how much fuel? I mean, the basic advantage of this is pulling dirty diesel off the highways. So that means that the price per gallon or whatever, I don't know how they're measuring that, has to be beneficial in order for these companies to make that selection, or for the state to make that selection. That fuel has to be at the right price, right? So that means it's probably not going to be $8 million a year. It's probably going to be more like $5 million a year if you're trying to entice people to move over to this natural gas. So how much over the time, and what could be done with that money to benefit the homeless who have a lack of bathrooms? I think of the chain link fencing around Greyhound, where there's 36 bathrooms in there on the men and the women's side, and there's chain link fencing, and there's all those homeless people in tents out there. So, and I also wanted to talk about, New York City used to send their scrubbed waste to Colorado to put on their winter wheat. I mean, why can't we have, in these outlying areas where people are, more into using composting toilets, why can't we send the P, the P to the alfalfa fields, which is what they say it could be used for. It only takes 30 days to sterilize it at 68 degrees.
Thank you.
Send it off to them for free. It's safer than
Thanks,
than
Maggie.
those, phosphorus plants that continually blow up in Texas.
Thanks, Maggie. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super Karma. What really impresses me about this RNG facility is the cost recovery to the people and the public on how rapid that can be based upon the fluctuation of the price that we're wholesaling out or Northwest is currently going to buy us. And the numbers are absolutely astounding. And to go to the renewable type energy and also have a cost recovery and also benefit from tax credits and also benefit from reducing diesel, I mean, this project is about the best I've seen, honestly. And I worked for Exxon, I worked for Amoco. I'm also a journeyman pipe fitter, so I understand when they're talking about the oil and gas industry. But the overall cost of this and the cost recovery is amazing. And now just in Phoenix, they just opened one up. It was a huge celebration, the same thing we're talking here. People coming in from different states, environmentalists looking at this, and they're in awe on what's happening here. So this, to me, will be a ribbon-cutting project when it opens. And it's going to draw a lot of attention even from other states. You're going to have people coming in and viewing this and looking at this and saying, this is really impressive. We're not the first to open it. We're going to probably be about the third or the fourth in my understanding. But for Portland, this is one of the best ways of clean energy, clean air, decreasing diesel use. This is impressive. This will receive awards. And you're normally used to me speaking in some negative ways, but if it's right on the mark, I say it is. And this is on the mark. This is impressive work from the city of Portland.
I wish I had been recording.
And well, I was going to also offer another compliment to Commissioner Hardesty. I'm impressed at the way that she does an overview on these type of contracts. I'm impressed the way that she questions every number, every detail. That's impressive work, and that's what I like to see. And you have someone over here not happy with what I'm saying about you, but that's okay too. That's life. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
But I'm not unhappy about what you're saying about Commissioner Hardesty. I'm unhappy about not being at lunch right now, so.
All right,
Let's
so
keep
these are
moving it along.
non-emergency ordinances. 167 is a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Ordinance 168 is also a non-emergency ordinance. It too moves to second reading. Next up, 169, and this is a second reading.
Authorize a competitive solicitation and contract award for the replacement of the Regional Automated Pawn and Secondhand Information Database System software.
Colleagues, any further discussion? This is a second reading. We've already heard a presentation of public testimony. Carla, please call the roll.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Udaly.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. 170.
Authorize an intergovernmental agreement between Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services, Procurement Services, Multnomah County, Washington County, Metro, and the Port of Portland for the development and administration of the Regional Clean Air Construction Program for approximately $136,000 annually for 7 years.
Colleagues, this intergovernmental agreement is a key milestone in the city's commitment to improve air quality in the Portland metro area by addressing high levels of diesel particulate matter pollution in our region. In 2017, the city began collaborating with regional partners specifically Metro, the Port of Portland, Multnomah County, and Washington County, on a regional clean air construction standard that would require the use of cleaner equipment on public construction projects. In December of 2018, the City Council adopted the Clean Air Construction Standard and directed Procurement Services to serve as the regional program administrator. This IGA between the City of Portland, Multnomah County, Washington County, Metro, and the Port of Portland establishes the Regional Clean Air Construction Program, outlining the roles, responsibilities, and financial commitments to support the regional implementation of the Clean Air Construction Standard. Before we begin the presentation, it was brought to my attention that there was an error in the financial impact statement, so I'd like to introduce a substitute impact statement. Although the IGA lays out the financial commitments of the city and other regional partners, it does not amend the budget, and the updated financial impact statement reflects this. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Udaley?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. Substitutes on the table. I'll now turn it over to Stacy Foreman and Lester Spittler from the Procurement Services for the staff presentation. Good afternoon. Thanks for your patience.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Hardesty, Commissioner Daly. I'm Lester Spittler, the Chief Procurement Officer, and I have the pleasure to be here to introduce the person next to me, as well as the group of folks from the partner agencies behind me that are going to provide invited testimony today. As the Mayor said, this is 4 years in the making. This is a collaborative effort on behalf of the 4 partner government agencies. And I think that's something to be celebrated in of itself, that 4 government agencies have gotten together to create a consistent policy and to clean up our air. I also want to recognize the person sitting next to me, Stacy Foreman. Stacy is famous in the sustainable procurement world. People know her expertise and her leadership. And her leadership and expertise are 2 things that have largely gotten the group to where they are today, and I believe are largely reasons why those other government agencies want to invest in the City of Portland to administer this program regionally. So I think that we all should be proud of Stacy and the work that she does. And so I'll hand it off to her to go through the details of the IGA and answer any questions that you may have.
Awesome, and thank you for acknowledging Stacy's work, Lester. I think that's fantastic. Stacy, I know you're slightly embarrassed looking, but you have earned the kudos. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Stacy Foreman, Sustainable Procurement Program Manager in Procurement Services, and I will be going over some of the details of the intergovernmental agreement before you today through this ordinance. As Lester mentioned, that this IGA is well over 4 years in the making, starting with some initial conversations that we had with DEQ, Port of Portland, Multnomah County, and Metro back in 2016. And I just want to take a moment to recognize, all the kudos that Lester just gave to me. Kudos goes out to all the colleagues that have been sitting in these bi-weekly meetings for the past few years. It's been a lot of effort and a lot of commitment. You'll be hearing shortly from Kathleen Johnson. She's with Washington County, John Washingtinsky with Multnomah County, David Breen with Port of Portland, Jenna Garman from Metro. Also, our colleagues at DEQ, Eric Feely, who's not here today, but he's been instrumental in this, as well as prior to his retirement, Kevin Downing. My gratitude to them is bottomless. So just wanted to acknowledge their commitments to this as well. As mentioned already, we've been before you before regarding the Clean Air Construction Standard. The most recent was in December of 2018, where we adopted the Clean Air Construction Standard. This is the standard that all these agencies have agreed to implement, all the same requirements. So when contractors go and are working on one of these agencies' projects, they're not going to face different requirements from different agencies. And this is something we heard a lot from the contracting industry, that they didn't want to have to deal with that. And also during that city resolution, we were directed to develop the regional program with Procurement Services as the program administrator. So we have spent the past 12-some months working on those details, working on what the program budget, regional program budget would look like, working on a cost share model, and then working out the roles and responsibilities, all of which are reflected in the intergovernmental agreement. So it is a 7-year agreement. The timeframe is reflective of the fact that the Clean Air Construction Standard is a phased-in approach. Again, in a response to concerns from the contracting industry about wanting to phase in stricter and stricter requirements over time. So the 7-year agreement reflects that timeline that is dictated in the Clean Air Construction Standard. So the intergovernmental agreement formally establishes the program. It formally establishes procurement services as the program administrator. And then it further defines roles and responsibilities in that program cost share model. So part of the roles and responsibilities includes an oversight committee, which will include representation from each of the signatory agencies. And those activities will be subject to public meetings and public records requirements, so we will be fully transparent in what we are doing in this committee, and the public are welcome to participate. The cost share model is comprised of both a fixed and sliding scale fee. We wanted to have a fixed fee to anybody who's participating in this program has their foot in the door and that they're committed at a base level. The sliding scale part reflects the fact that each agency is doing different volumes of construction work. And in order to be fair, they'll be using the program resources at different levels. In addition to the IGA cost model and financial contribution, each agency is being asked to commit to contingency funds, and as well as funding some of the on-site compliance inspections at their construction sites. So for fiscal year 2021, the city's general fund ask related to this program is $136,183. We expect that to remain basically the same for each year through the duration of the IGA. As a reference, the partner agency's fiscal commitments for 2020-21 total approximately $191,000, and that includes their contingency set-asides as well.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. And thank you so much for briefing me yesterday. Sorry you were delayed, Lester. As we discussed yesterday, as you know, we cannot commit other city councils to a 7-year funding formula. And so let's just say that with new people on the council, you don't get this money. Can you do this within your current budget?
No, we cannot do it within our current budget.
And so what would be your alternative?
So there is language in the IGA that would discuss what would happen if a particular agency cannot meet that funding equipment, and would involve that advisory committee coming up with, well, what can we do at that time? So,
thank you.
Yeah. I also want to acknowledge that the Port of Portland has already signed the IGA, and you'll hear from my colleagues here shortly about their process for acquiring signatures as well.
Thank you.
So lastly, just again, the ordinance today before you authorizes the Chief Procurement Officer to sign and execute the IGA. It authorizes the Chief Procurement Officer to sign and execute amendments. However, it does acknowledge that the city's fiscal contribution of IGA funds are contingent upon the City Council's approval of the fiscal year 2021 budget and subsequent fiscal year budget. So for example, this year, we do have a decision package that will be coming before you for the fiscal year 2021 budget that is for that $136,183 ask. So with that, I'll take questions.
How will this impact your workload at procurement?
Well, for example, that the budget that we put together as a regional group does include a limited term full-time employee to serve as the program coordinator.
Stacy would supervise that employee, so she would be gaining an employee to manage and would still be available for oversight and to contribute to the work.
I just want to make sure that if we're signing an agreement, that we are mindful of what it will cost the city of Portland, right? Because I've seen several of these come through, and we didn't anticipate that there would be administrative overhead, that there would be additional costs associated with either collecting money or distributing it, right? So I just want to make sure that we have the right number, because I hate to have to come back and try to change it later.
Good point.
Thank you.
Commissioner Daly.
My ears perked up when you mentioned concerns, industry concerns, and how that pertained to the 7-year IGA. Can you repeat that? I want
Right.
to make sure I.
So this goes back specifically to the Clean Air Construction Standard itself, in which the standard is implemented over time, over a 7-year time frame. So for example, starting in 2021, we have restrictions on Tier 0 non-road equipment. That's the dirtiest, oldest types of equipment out there. The following year, we have restrictions on Tier 0, Tier 1. So it progresses over time. And so my reference to that in the IGA is just that that's why the IGA is for over 7-year time frame, because we have to implement the standard over that time frame.
And what year are we in now?
So we're in the very first year, which is just of the standard, which is an implementation of idling restrictions.
Okay. I mean, I always like to point out that Multnomah County has the worst air pollution in our state, and Portland has some of the worst air pollution in the country. And I'm not real sympathetic to industry on this issue.
Understand.
They're
Very good.
poisoning us.
All right.
Appreciate it. Is there any, does that complete your presentation?
Yes, and we have the
Invited testimony.
invited testimony.
All right, we have invited testimony. Bring them on up, please. Oh, I have it, sorry. So we have, here it is, invited testimony. We have David Breen, the Environmental, Air Quality, and Energy Manager for the Port of Portland. Thank you for being here. Jenna Garman, Sustainability Coordinator for Metro. And I'm going to get it right. John Westanewski? Wastanewski?
It's Vashitinsky.
Dang it!
Mayor.
It wasn't even close. No, I was
Everyone's
not
calling
even
me John
close.
W. Mayor.
That's
so it
terrible.
It sounds so much better when you say
You know, what's really funny is earlier in my talking points today, I had like a phonetic spelling from for Chuck Jones. I'm not kidding you. Like Chuck Jones is here. But I did not get it from John, so there you have it.
They just like to mess with us, I think.
They do. It's always about that. Great. All right, well, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here, thrilled to have you as partners. Obviously, this clean air construction standard is very, very important to us, and it's important to you. And I don't know if there's a particular order. If not, I'll just start down on the left.
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and city council members.
No. That train left the station a long time ago. Long time ago.
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. It's almost good evening.
Good evening. I'm David Breen. I am the Environmental Air Quality and Energy Manager for the Port of Portland.
Thank you.
This collaboration creates an important opportunity to move the dial on reducing diesel emissions, which will benefit the health of our employees, our workers, contractors, and our communities. So we're deeply thankful for your leadership on this significant public health issue. The program will not look exactly the same for each agency, but we're committed to implementing a common standard that will provide contractors with uniformity and predictability. The port stands behind our endorsement of the IGA and have set aside money in our fiscal year 21 budget to cover our portion of the shared costs. We work hard to find opportunities such as this to work together towards a common good, and this is one more step in the right direction. So thank you very much for your work on this.
Thank you. Appreciate your being here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. I'm Jenna Garman, I'm Metro's Sustainability Manager. I'm happy to be here today to express Metro's support for the city's authorization of the IGA for the development and administration of the Regional Clean Air Construction Program. Metro Council has expressed strong support for doing more to address diesel pollution because, as we know, it's deadly. It impacts people of color and people with low income disproportionately. It's a significant source of black carbon, which is, we know is a significant greenhouse or climate change contributor, and we have some of the highest diesel pollution levels in the country, as Commissioner Daly mentioned. And so to that end, Metro Council has signaled their support and their intent to adopt the Clean Air Construction Standard for Metro projects, hopefully in March, fingers crossed. And Metro is very supportive of both taking this regional approach through establishing the program and also having the city serve as the lead agency. And in fact, that both of those factors have been important considerations in Metro's planning for implementing the standard. And Metro Council President Lynn Peterson did send a letter stating Metro's support for both of those issues back in March 2019, and that has really been our working assumption ever since then. The IGA has been reviewed by Metro's finance director and Metro's attorney and has also been shared with Metro Council, and they will approve the IGA when they adopt the standard. With respect to Metro's financial contribution to the regional program, again, our finance director and our council are well aware of Metro's portion of the cost share, the contingency funds, the job site inspection funds, and these funds have been included in our FY21 budget proposal. So in closing, Metro is very appreciative of the city taking this lead role in collaboration, and we urge the city to move forward with authorizing the IGA. And while I have the floor, I do want to also express my deep appreciation for Stacy Foreman's role and leadership with this group, and we certainly would not be where we are today without her.
Thank you. Appreciate your being here. Thank you for your leadership.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kathleen yeah, again, I know, that's what my note said. I heard Commissioner Udaley's wish for lunch, and I think I'm right there with you. My name is Kathleen Johnson. I'm the Environmental Health Program Coordinator for Washington County. Are you allowed to say ditto for public comment for all my colleagues? Yes. No. Right. No, I mostly joke, but very similar to what my colleagues before me have said is that this is a significant public health issue, and Washington County is very pleased to be a part of this regional program. We have adopted the Clean Air Construction Standards into our purchasing rules just this month, so that's very exciting, and have budgeted accordingly for our contribution to the regional program. And I'm mostly here today just to really show and express our appreciation for the city taking a leadership role in this work. I don't think that we would be able to do it without the role that the city of Portland is playing, and so I really want to emphasize that. And again, as Jenna said, I also really want to express our appreciation for Stacy Foreman. She is an incredible resource, an amazing organizer, and I truly believe that without her leadership, we would not be where we are today, similar to what Jenna said. We are excited to be a part of the innovative solution in helping to address our region's air pollution problem, and I look forward to our continued work with the City of Portland.
Excellent. Thank you, and thank you for your leadership as well.
Great. Hi, good afternoon. My name is John Washtinsky. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Multnomah County. I wanted to, Stacy deserves all the kudos that she's getting. I also wanted to thank you, Mayor Wheeler, and the rest of the council for making the investment in this program. It's really easy and sexy to go out and say, we have a problem and we're going to do something about it. It's much harder to actually spend the time and make the investments to put a program in place to actually address the issue. And I would like to say that this program is actually going to address a major chunk of the issue that yet hasn't been, we got together, we went to the legislature, we fought for a more comprehensive solution at the state legislature. We got HB 2007, which is going to address on-road medium and heavy-duty diesels. It also put in place contracting standards at our urging for state contracts over $20 million. So that's really important work. And then here locally through the coalition of these 5 jurisdictions and hopefully others in the future, we're going to be able to really shift the market towards cleaner equipment and get that older equipment that's been sort of hanging around the market for decades in some cases, out of the system. And then I just, having worked on this issue for so long and to be at this point, at this table today is really gratifying. So I want to thank you, especially Mayor Wheeler, for your leadership on this, and thank you to my colleagues here too.
Well,
Deborah Kafori loves this program. It's in her budget. we're going to give we're ready to sign the IGA, and when we have the money, so.
Yeah, look, this has been very much a regional collaborative effort, and I think this is great. I'm sort of sorry it was the very last item on our agenda today. And all of you have provided substantial leadership, a lot of time, a lot of energy to make this work, and you're, by extension, committing to a lot of work going forward. And any credit you're giving to me, I'm going to give right back to procurement, to Stacy, and to Lester, and the hard work that they do. The city staff is phenomenal, and they make us look good each and every day, and this is just another example. But thank you for the collaborative partnership. We really appreciate it. Colleagues, anything else before I move this to second?
This is
Exciting.
testimony.
Oh, yeah. I forgot the public. I see Maggie over there. Any public testimony on this item? Maggie, anything? All right.
It was just Maggie and Lightning had signed up.
Okay, very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading, and we are adjourned for the next 47 minutes.